We couldn't help but notice how many people enjoy drifting off to sleep while listening to our essays. So, we've crafted another thoughtful piece, designed to gently guide you into a peaceful night's rest. Imagine gazing upon a stretch of water at daybreak, with lavender mist drifting across the surface as though it carries untold secrets. The world around you slumbers, the air is crisp, and you are the sole witness to a new morning. No words pass your lips. There is only the distant call of a bird and the rustle of leaves whispering their private wisdom. At that moment, you sense a gentle shift, as if you have left behind the familiar clamor of daily life and entered a quieter realm. This feeling, at once peaceful and slightly mysterious, embodies the essence of solitude. Solitude resembles a threshold. Crossing it can be enchanting, for it evokes the possibility of deeper self-awareness, insight, and renewal. Yet, it may also feel unfamiliar, for we live in an age defined by ceaseless communication and instant responses. Societies across the globe champion extroversion, collaboration, and connectivity.
Man was learning to numerically relate and to predict. Theories were developed by which the many factors in a problem could be numerically related. But the magnitude of the calculations necessary made many such theories impractical.
Waking up to a barrage of messages on a phone, or continually occupying oneself with scrolling and browsing, can seem like the normal state of affairs. Against that background, genuine solitude can appear both beautiful and elusive, a fleeting oasis of time and space where one can simply be. Humanity's fascination with solitude stretches across centuries and continents. In religious traditions, there is a recurring motif of ascetics and visionaries who withdrew from society to dwell in the quiet hush of the desert, the forest, or the mountain. Philosophers and writers likewise praise the clarifying power of time spent alone, whether it is to wander the countryside in contemplative reverie or to wrestle with thoughts in a private study. Artists often tell of how moments of introspection fueled their creativity. Scientists and inventors speak of revelations that arrived only when free from the stream of social feedback. Yet solitude is a word carrying multiple shades of meaning. For some, it brings healing rest from the demands of a noisy environment. For others, it signifies a confrontation with the echoes of their mind, which can be a source of anxiety if they feel unprepared. At times, solitude is conflated with loneliness. Even though the two differ at the core, loneliness arises from an unmet desire for connection, while solitude is often welcomed for the mental freedom it provides. Defining solitude. Solitude can be viewed as a conscious choice to be alone, marking a key distinction from loneliness, which typically involves a feeling of being cut off from desired companionship. This is not merely a technical difference in terminology. In solitude, individuals often feel empowered. They seek or accept aloneness to focus on personal projects, spiritual insight, or simply to pause the torrent of daily interactions. Loneliness, on the other hand, carries the sting of unmet social needs, painting solitude as unwelcome. It is perhaps easiest to think of solitude as a space or moment in which external stimuli become muted, allowing for a more pronounced sense of one's internal world. This can happen physically, such as when a person retreats to a mountaintop cabin. It can happen temporally, such as when an individual wakes early before others begin their day. It may even happen psychologically, as when someone meditates in a busy train station, forging an inward stillness despite the surrounding commotion. Because of its association with silence or quiet, solitude often heightens awareness. When group chatter and social obligations dissolve, a person's thoughts and emotions emerge more starkly. One might feel a sense of calm or creativity. Alternatively, anxieties lurking beneath the surface can become more perceptible. Thus, solitude is by its nature a revealing condition, shining a flashlight on one's inner life. Paradoxically, it is precisely this self-revelation that lends solitude its transformative power, and that can make it daunting. Individuals unaccustomed to introspection might find solitude unsettling, a confrontation with truths they have not examined. Yet those who cultivate it mindfully frequently attest that the reward is greater clarity and the ability to live more authentically once they rejoin social spheres. Historical and philosophical perspectives on solitude. Ancient Greek and Roman views. Philosophers of the ancient Mediterranean world understood the value of reflective withdrawal. While they did not always label these practices as solitude, their approaches to self-examination often required some degree of aloneness. Socrates is said to have paused to consider in absolute stillness whatever questions preoccupied him before engaging others. Plato, in his allegories, implied that withdrawing from the common illusions of the crowd was necessary to perceive higher truths. Stoic philosophers such as Seneca embraced an inner fortress of reflection. Though they were active in society, they recommended intervals of mental seclusion to better train one's moral compass and cultivate equanimity. Seneca's letters offer guidance for those wrestling with adversity, advocating for times of quiet where one can confront personal failings and aspirations with clear-eyed calm. Marcus Aurelius, another prominent Stoic, composed meditative writings during stolen private moments. Even though he was an emperor guiding affairs of state, he acknowledged solitude as an indispensable ally in clarifying his judgments. Early Christian and monastic traditions. The early centuries of Christianity saw men and women seeking God in literal deserts. These desert fathers and mothers believed that the bustle of towns hindered direct communion with the divine. They fled to remote landscapes, rocky deserts and caves, where they could devote themselves to continuous prayer and asceticism. Though asceticism is not universal to all traditions, the Christian monks of this era found that solitude sharpened their spiritual senses, forcing them to confront not only the presence of God, but also their inner temptations and frailties. Over time, monastic communities arose, often incorporating periods of shared worship with extended intervals of silence. Monks and nuns might gather for daily prayers and communal meals, then retire to simple cells to practice contemplative reading, manual labor, or silent meditation. The Rule of St. Benedict, for instance, contained stipulations that balanced community living with solitary reflection. Thus, solitude became a disciplined practice, anchored in the rhythms of prayer, fasting, and reflection. These monastic ideals influenced broader Christian thought. Writers like Thomas Merton, living many centuries after the early hermits, carried forward the notion that solitude does not necessarily remove one from responsibility toward humanity. Instead, it equips a person to re-engage the world with greater compassion and insight. Merton, ensconced in a Trappist monastery, continually stressed that solitude was not about despising the outside world, but about learning to see it anew through the lens of inner transformation. Renaissance and Enlightenment thinkers. In Renaissance Europe, scholars increasingly sought private retreats to pore over ancient manuscripts and produce new works. Michel de Montaigne famously secluded himself in a tower library, surrounding himself with books and the mottos he inscribed on his walls. From that vantage, he produced essays that served as personal meditations on friendship, virtue, mortality, and self-knowledge. Montaigne's example suggests how solitude can be a fertile ground for forging a deeper understanding of the human condition. During the period often called the Enlightenment, conversation flourished in the salons and coffeehouses of major cities, yet there was also a strong thread of thought cautioning against constant social engagement. Blaise Pascal reflected that many of humanity's problems stem from our inability to sit quietly alone in a room. His statement may feel hyperbolic, yet it resonates in modern times where the compulsion to fill silence can be overwhelming. Pascal's remark hints that the difficulty of solitude is not simply a neutral fact, but perhaps a root cause of restlessness, conflict, and distraction. Romantic and Transcendentalist eras. By the time the Romantic movement rose to prominence in Europe, solitude was celebrated with renewed fervor. Writers and artists emphasized the individual's emotional communion with nature. Poets such as William Wordsworth wandered amid the Lake District, finding in these solitary walks the seeds of transcendent poetry. Wordsworth's solitary experiences in Spots of Time allowed him to fuse memory, imagination, and raw emotion into verses that still resonate today. Across the Atlantic, thinkers like Ralph Waldo Emerson advocated self-reliance, urging each person to look within for wisdom rather than conform unquestioningly to societal norms. His friend Henry David Thoreau famously spent a couple of years at Walden Pond, living in a small cabin to explore the essence of deliberate living. Walden, his resulting text, has become a defining statement on the value of solitude in nature. Thoreau's experiment continues to speak to readers seeking a deeper connection with the environment and a simpler way of life. Modern and postmodern perspectives. Entering more modern times, philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche championed the idea that individuals must periodically step away from society's herd mentality to discover their authentic values. Although Nietzsche often employed combative or dramatic language, his underlying conviction was that solitude was a crucible for self-creation, where one's destiny could be shaped beyond the bounds of popular opinion. 20th century existentialists, including Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, observed that isolation can also heighten the stark sense of being alone in an indifferent universe. Their writings underscore the anxiety that can arise when one faces the absence of inherent meaning in life. While not every existentialist advocated for solitude as a solution, they recognized that solitary reflection often triggers awareness of freedom and responsibility. In parallel, postmodern thinkers like Michel Foucault pointed out that even when alone, individuals carry with them the social constructs and power relations learned from society. The net effect is that solitude can still be shaped by external forces, thus complicating our understanding of what it truly means to be alone. Contrasting solitude and loneliness. Popular conversation often mingles solitude with loneliness, yet these experiences diverge in critical ways. Loneliness is typically experienced as painful, marked by an acute sense of being unseen, unwanted, or locked outside the doors of the community. Those who are lonely may crave closeness with others, but find it elusive. In such instances, time alone is not a gift, but a burden. Solitude, however, usually emerges from a deliberate choice to be by oneself. Individuals who practice solitude often relish the opportunity to unplug from social demands, seeing it as a path to greater self-knowledge or creative freedom. The emotional tone is generally positive, peaceful, introspective, sometimes invigorating. While loneliness can drain a person's mental and emotional reserves, solitude tends to replenish them, assuming it is freely chosen and not prolonged to an unhealthy extreme. Nonetheless, solitude and loneliness can indeed overlap. Someone might set out for a quiet weekend retreat, only to discover that unaddressed feelings of longing, regret, or sadness surface in the absence of distractions. Equally, a person feeling lonely might stumble upon a sense of contentment through mindful acceptance of their alone time. Thus, we must not overly simplify these states. Still, the fundamental distinction remains. Loneliness feels imposed, whereas solitude is embraced. Psychological and emotional benefits of solitude. Increased self-awareness. One of solitude's richest gifts is the deepening of self-awareness. In group settings, identities confuse with collective roles, and individuals may rarely question the underlying motives or assumptions guiding them. Solitude removes the immediate feedback of others, exposing one to unfiltered thoughts and feelings. Over time, such reflections can clarify values, preferences, and goals. Some forms of therapeutic practice, encourage clients to spend moments alone, journaling or meditating, precisely because this inner dialogue helps unravel false narratives. Rather than relying on external validation or denial, a person quietly confronts their mind, discovering hidden dreams or unspoken fears. Psychologists who study self-awareness often highlight how solitary reflection complements social support, offering a balanced path to self-understanding. Emotional regulation. Daily life can be stressful, whether due to work demands, family obligations, or internal struggles like anxiety. Solitude provides a pause button, allowing the emotional system to rest and reset. Even a brief interlude, a walk in a park, or an hour with devices turned off can soothe frayed nerves. By stepping out of the noise, an individual can examine the triggers that cause upset, ultimately returning to responsibilities with a calmer perspective. Indeed, many mental health professionals advocate for solitude breaks, similar to water breaks for athletes, especially in workplaces with intense pacing. These breaks may be as simple as closing one's office door or finding a quiet stairwell. The principle remains the same. A short, deliberate withdrawal can mitigate burnout and restore emotional equilibrium. Creativity and problem solving. Creative breakthroughs often arise when the mind drifts in solitude. Free from the need to respond to external chatter, the individual can enter states of deep concentration or imaginative wandering. Writers, painters, and inventors throughout history have credited solitary hours as essential for transforming scattered ideas into cohesive visions. Even in fields not typically associated with creativity, such as mathematics or engineering, solitude can foster innovative thinking by enabling extended focus. Psychologists researching creative processes confirm that while group brainstorming can spark initial ideas, the act of refining and synthesizing them usually benefits from alone time. Solitude removes social pressure to please or conform, granting thinkers the freedom to explore tangential or unconventional approaches without the immediate influence of others. Spiritual and existential insight. Many world religions place solitude at the heart of spiritual practice, whether it is the hermit's cell, the monk's cloister, or the yogi's cave. In quiet isolation, believers listen more intently for the voice of God or divine truth. Secular spiritual seekers, too, describe moments of awe and transcendence occurring while seated on a lonely mountain ridge or walking alone at dawn. They sense a connection to something larger than themselves, unmediated by social constructs. Existentially speaking, solitude can bring a person face to face with deep questions regarding the nature of reality and personal meaning. Such encounters may provoke discomfort, but can also spark profound epiphanies. Without the cacophony of daily tasks or trivial conversations, one can contemplate mortality, purpose, or cosmic mystery on a level that group contexts seldom allow. Restoration and resilience. Solitude is a remedy for the modern ailment of overstimulation. With digital screens constantly vying for attention, the human mind is rarely given the space to rest. Psychologists studying attention restoration theory suggest that natural or calm solitary settings help the brain recover from fatigue. Time spent gazing at a field or simply letting the mind wander can replenish cognitive reserves, making people more effective when they resume tasks requiring focused attention. Such restoration extends beyond mere efficiency. Emotional resilience grows when individuals regularly step away from commotion, learning to navigate their internal states. They become more adept at identifying the early warning signs of stress and more skilled at diffusing tension before it escalates. In this way, solitude functions like a mental and emotional spa, an environment conducive to rejuvenation. Practical approaches to cultivating healthy solitude. Setting boundaries. In an era where many feel perpetually on call, safeguarding solitude requires conscious effort. This might involve designating specific times of day as offline periods, silencing alerts, or physically moving away from communal spaces. One might carve out a reading nook in the home or reserve a weekly slot for a digital detox. Communicating these boundaries to loved ones and colleagues is key, ensuring that the solitude seeker does not come across as aloof or neglectful. Boundaries also involve an internal shift. Many people feel anxious if they are not instantly reachable, as if they are shirking responsibilities. By reframing solitude as a healthy, necessary practice, guilt diminishes. Life partners, friends, or family members often become more supportive when they see that short intervals of solitude enhance a person's well-being and availability afterward. Mindful or meditative practices. Techniques like mindfulness and seated meditation provide a structured form of solitude. Even in a small apartment or busy household, one can sit quietly, close the eyes, and turn attention inward. While the hustle and bustle might not vanish, individuals can learn to observe external noises without becoming emotionally entangled. Over time, this fosters an inner sanctuary that remains accessible under various conditions. Journaling similarly enriches solitude by offering a tangible outlet for thoughts. Writing can capture fleeting ideas or emotions, turning them into a narrative that can be analyzed and understood. Some people prefer pen and paper diaries, while others use typed documents. Whichever method one chooses, the act of private reflection in written form can clarify insights that remain half-formed if left swirling in the mind. Retreats and nature immersion. Organized retreats, silent, meditative, or otherwise, are designed to immerse participants in solitude for an extended period. These events reduce daily distractions, sometimes prohibiting phone use or limiting conversation. Although retreat environments might vary widely, from austere monastic settings to cozy wellness centers, the core idea is consistent. By stepping out of habitual routines and social roles, individuals can experience a deeper level of introspection. Nature immersion works similarly. Spending a weekend trekking through forests, walking along a secluded coastline, or stargazing in a national park can awaken a sense of wonder. These natural encounters often grant a perspective shift, reminding people of the planet's vastness and complexity. In that context, personal stresses might feel more manageable, and creative or spiritual senses can blossom. Balancing engagement and withdrawal. While solitude is advantageous in many ways, it is not a panacea for all of life's challenges. It is also not healthy to substitute every social interaction with aloneness. Humans are social creatures, reliant on connection for emotional and physical well-being. The ideal lies in balancing solitude with engagement, so that each realm enriches the other. A healthy schedule might feature meaningful time spent with loved ones, group collaboration at work, or involvement in community events, punctuated by quiet intervals for reflection. The exact balance varies by individual. An introvert might need longer periods of personal space to recharge, while an extrovert might thrive with more frequent social engagement and briefer moments of solitude. Regardless of temperament, the principle is consistent. Solitary time, when maintained in harmony with social bonds, can enhance overall satisfaction and interpersonal presence. Insights from seminal books on solitude. Many authors have devoted entire works to the subject of solitude, examining its nuances from psychological, spiritual, or personal viewpoints. Below are a handful of notable texts that collectively paint a diverse portrait of why being alone can be beneficial and how best to integrate it into life. Walden by Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau's sojourn in a small cabin by a serene pond, which stretched beyond a single year, represents a famed experiment in deliberate living. Though his project was partly a critique of materialistic society, it also served as a testament to solitude's ability to foster a heightened appreciation for the natural world and a clearer sense of purpose. In reflections on morning walks, the changes of the seasons, and the simple tasks of daily life, Thoreau exemplified how removing distractions can reveal the abundance present in seemingly mundane moments. Solitude, A Return to the Self by Anthony Storr. Anthony Storr, a British psychiatrist, questioned the mid-20th century assumption that psychological health depends almost entirely on interpersonal relationships. Drawing examples from history and clinical practice, Storr argued that imaginative and intellectual engagement can flourish in solitude. Although supportive relationships remain important, Storr insisted that solitary pursuits, such as artistic creation or philosophical contemplation, can also fulfill and heal. Thoughts in Solitude by Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton's reflections illustrate how solitude can become a spiritual discipline, guiding one to humility and communion with a divine presence. He viewed solitude not as an escape from civilization, but a purposeful retreat that prepares the seeker to engage the world with renewed clarity and compassion. Merton's ideas, though rooted in Christian mysticism, resonate with the broader notion that quiet time alone allows for a purifying confrontation with one's own deeper truths. The Art of Solitude by Stephen Batchelor. Stephen Batchelor, known for his secular Buddhist approach, writes about solitude as a skill that must be cultivated. Drawing upon meditation experiences and existential philosophy, Batchelor presents solitude as a practice of stepping away from perpetual stimulation, allowing insights about the nature of self and reality to emerge. He portrays solitude as an art, suggesting that one's capacity to navigate aloneness gracefully can shape ethical awareness and compassion. Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain. While focusing on introversion, Susan Cain's popular work also highlights the creative and contemplative dimensions of solitude. She critiques a society that often presses people toward constant collaboration and performative extroversion, describing how many outstanding achievements originated from solitary or introspective endeavors. Though the book underscores the strengths of introverts, it contains lessons applicable to anyone who wishes to reclaim personal space for quiet thought. Spiritual dimensions of solitude. Solitude's role in spiritual development appears throughout the records of religious and contemplative traditions worldwide, whether one interprets it in the context of organized faith or as a more personal, secular spirituality. The underlying principle is that quiet aloneness allows people to access profound layers of insight and communion. Encounter with the transcendent. In numerous belief systems, from Christian mystics to Hindu ascetics, solitude is prized because it fosters an unmediated encounter with the sacred. According to this viewpoint, the voice of the divine is often drowned out by the clangor of everyday life. Only when an individual withdraws can they hear the gentle guidance or experience the subtle presence that reveals the numinous, self-emptying. Christian mystics sometimes speak of kenosis, or self-emptying, which involves setting aside personal egoic concerns so that divine grace can enter. Buddhists emphasize letting go of attachments that tie the mind to a false sense of identity. Solitude is a time for confronting these attachments with less distraction. Without societal roles or immediate feedback from others, one is challenged to see what remains when the usual defenses and pretenses fall away. Moral and ethical recalibration. Spiritual teachers throughout history have noted that authentic solitude leads not to selfish withdrawal, but to refined moral awareness. When alone, a person may vividly perceive how their actions and attitudes affect others, recognizing patterns that are less visible in the rush of social living. By emerging from solitude with greater clarity and humility, one's capacity for compassion and ethical responsibility can deepen. Creativity, art, and solitude. Artists, poets, composers, and innovators frequently cite solitude as vital to their craft. Although collaboration and critique can be invaluable at certain stages, the genesis of new ideas often occurs in the private realm. The reason is partly psychological. Solitary work grants freedom to experiment with half-formed concepts or radical visions without worrying about immediate judgment or the demands of group consensus. The diaries and letters of creative luminaries reveal how they structured time alone to incubate ideas. Some rose before sunrise to write in stillness, while others withdrew to remote cottages or studios. Even when artists lived in bustling cities, they often carved out periods of isolation to refine their approach. In many cases, the final product, an innovative painting style, a new musical form, a freshly woven narrative, owed its inception to these pockets of unbroken attention. Such testimonies resonate with modern findings in creativity research. By giving the mind ample space to wander or to concentrate deeply, solitude can foster a state of flow, described by psychologists as an optimal zone of engagement. In that state, self-consciousness diminishes, time seems to dissolve, and the creative task unfolds with a sense of effortless focus. While one may eventually share and refine the work in a community, solitude remains a critical step in the creative process. Misconceptions and risks associated with solitude. Despite solitude's manifold virtues, it carries potential risks and misunderstandings that warrant consideration. A balanced perspective recognizes that solitude is neither universally beneficial nor universally detrimental. Rather, it depends on the individual's mindset, circumstances, and intentions. Escapism. One danger is using solitude as a shield against challenges. If a person withdraws not for clarity, but to avoid uncomfortable conversations or responsibilities, they may be evading growth opportunities. Hiding in solitude can perpetuate denial, leaving unresolved problems to fester. Eventually, what began as a quiet respite can become an isolated fortress, trapping the individual instead of liberating them. Social alienation. Excessive solitude can breed a sense of alienation, especially if it replaces healthy social connections. People might become more awkward in group settings or lose the ability to empathize with others if they rarely engage with them. In cultures that prize hyper-independence, some individuals may romanticize extended aloneness without acknowledging the genuine need for supportive relationships. Romanticizing solitude. The figure of the solitary genius, the hermit artist, the visionary saint, has captured the imagination of many, yet not all solitude leads to revelations. Some individuals may grow restless or depressed if they spend too much time disconnected from society, particularly if they lack the psychological or spiritual resources to navigate their inner worlds. Thus, romantic notions of solitude should be tempered with realism. Lack of social support. Humans thrive on interdependence. Even those deeply drawn to solitude need a network of people they trust. Sudden or extreme isolation in response to emotional distress can exacerbate underlying mental health struggles. Hence, mental health professionals often recommend that solitude be balanced with therapy sessions, group support, or friendships that provide a safety net. Societal and cultural dimensions. Attitudes towards solitude are shaped by broader cultural values. In some societies, a person seeking time alone might be viewed with suspicion and labeled aloof or antisocial. In others, especially those influenced by contemplative religions, periods of withdrawal are seen as a natural and even praiseworthy practice. Over the centuries, industrialization and urbanization have altered the social landscape, making it possible for individuals to live in crowded apartments while feeling deeply alone. Conversely, modern technology permits living on a remote homestead while still maintaining virtual connections. In many Western settings, the cultural bias tilts toward extroverted behaviors, group brainstorming in offices, public speaking as a sign of leadership, and frequent social media posting as a measure of one's involvement. People who require significant stretches of solitude may feel misunderstood, yet there is evidence that this bias is starting to shift. Movements emphasizing minimalism, slow living, or mindfulness retreats represent a counter-movement, valuing silent reflection as much as social networking. It is also worth noting that solitude has at times been associated with privilege. The ability to take a sabbatical, rent a cabin, or devote hours to reading and meditation may be out of reach for those who juggle multiple jobs or family responsibilities. Critics argue that promoting solitude can neglect the economic and social realities that prevent many from finding or affording time alone. This criticism does not negate solitude's inherent worth, but it underscores that access to solitude is influenced by socioeconomic factors. The influence of technology. Technology has dramatically reconfigured the landscape of solitude. With smartphones and the internet, the line between solitude and connection can blur. One might be physically alone in an apartment, yet mentally tethered to an online network brimming with conversations, notifications, and social media updates. Online interactions. Connectivity can mitigate genuine loneliness for those unable to leave their homes or find local communities. However, the steady drip of digital input can also erode solitude. Even individuals attempting to relax in quiet might feel the tug of instant messaging or feel compelled to check how many likes their latest post received. Virtual retreats. Some organizations offer virtual solitude retreats, wherein participants log off non-essential social media and instead join online gatherings for guided meditation or lectures. These can be helpful to a degree, especially if physical travel is not feasible. Yet the fact that they remain online-based means that the participant never fully severs the digital tether. Critics caution that true solitude, where one listens only to their internal sense of time and presence, might be diluted by the ongoing hum of virtual connectivity. Cyberbullying and social pressure. Modern connectivity fosters new forms of social pressure, from relentless group chats to online harassment. In response, solitude can serve as a refuge from digital negativity. By deliberately stepping away from these platforms, individuals can safeguard their well-being. The challenge is that social media platforms and digital services are often designed to keep users engaged. Choosing solitude thus becomes an act of boundary setting, requiring resolve and self-awareness. Integrating solitude into daily life. Micro-solitudes. For many, extended retreats are not feasible given responsibilities and financial realities. In such cases, integrating tiny pockets of solitude into daily routines can offer significant benefits. These micro-solitudes might include a few mindful breaths upon waking, a brief walk alone during a lunch break, or a silent cup of tea in the afternoon. By sprinkling these moments throughout the day, one steadily accustoms the mind to intervals of quiet reflection without massively overhauling a schedule. Mindful commuting. Commuting can transform from a mundane necessity into a contemplative exercise. Instead of filling the journey with podcasts, music, or phone calls, one might decide on certain days to let the mind wander, observe the surroundings, or cultivate a sense of presence. Even if the route is noisy, a crowded train, a busy freeway, the act of mindfully disengaging from incessant input can yield a small but valuable window of solitude. Domestic sanctuaries. In a home environment shared with partners, roommates, or children, solitude might be elusive. To foster it, one can designate a particular corner, perhaps a nook near a window or a separate room if possible, as a sanctuary for reading, meditation, or quiet hobbies. Over time, the consistent use of that space for peaceful activities helps all household members recognize its function. This arrangement not only promotes personal well-being, but also models healthy boundaries for others, including children learning about the value of respectful privacy. Periodic retreats. Short personal getaways can prove transformative even if one cannot manage a lengthy sabbatical. A long weekend in a rustic cabin, a solo camping trip, or a guided silent retreat at a spiritual center might open new vistas of self-understanding and tranquility. Returning to familiar routines afterward, individuals often report renewed mental clarity or an expanded sense of gratitude for the people and habits that populate their lives. Balancing solitude with healthy relationships. At its best, solitude complements and strengthens relationships. Providing an arena for self-reflection can nurture emotional independence, making a person less likely to project insecurities onto loved ones. Some therapists observe that couples who maintain individual space for solitude foster greater mutual respect and curiosity. However, attaining this balance requires trust and communication. A partner or close friend might initially misinterpret a desire for solitude as a personal rejection. Establishing that solitude is an essential form of self-care, much like exercise or reading, can alleviate misunderstandings. Children, too, benefit from seeing adults engage in regular moments of calm. This models how they might later seek healthy solitude to process their feelings. In workplaces or academic settings, an openness to solitude can spark both innovation and better teamwork. Employees who refresh themselves in quiet intervals often return to group collaboration with sharper focus and a more patient disposition. Likewise, teams that respect each other's need for quiet can create an environment that avoids the pitfalls of endless meetings and groupthink. Cultural icons, literature, and solitude. Renowned figures across the arts and humanities have championed solitude in their ways, leaving behind ample testimony that underscores its potency. Virginia Woolf wrote an influential essay arguing that a woman must have a private room and the means to support herself if she is to write creatively. Though her essay primarily tackled gender inequality, it also advanced the premise that uninterrupted private space is foundational for unleashing one's imaginative or intellectual gifts. Rainer Maria Rilke, the Austro-Bohemian poet, composed letters urging younger creatives to explore their inner worlds through solitude. He believed that authentic artistry emerges from deep within rather than from external approval. These letters continue to inspire budding writers to cultivate inwardness through quiet reflection. Franz Kafka documented in his diaries the tension between his introverted inclinations and the demands of family and society. While some of his reflections show the strain of solitude that edges into loneliness, they also affirm that his starkly original literary voice took shape partially through introspection. From these varied examples, one sees that solitude has historically served as an incubator not only for personal insight, but also for cultural innovation. Even if these icons are sometimes wrestled with existential doubt or a sense of being misunderstood, their creative and intellectual legacies suggest that time alone can reshape how we perceive reality. The therapeutic use of solitude. Several therapeutic modalities incorporate elements of solitude, recognizing that it can serve as a powerful catalyst for self-discovery and healing. Wilderness therapy programs, for instance, place participants in carefully supervised natural settings. While not entirely alone, individuals are encouraged to spend intervals reflecting in solitude, journaling, or meditating amidst a forest or desert landscape. The unfamiliar environment strips away many societal cues, opening a space for deeper introspection. Similarly, therapy clients might be guided to take short solo retreats during a course of counseling. This does not necessarily require traveling far. One might simply stay at home in relative silence for a day, turning off phones, avoiding unneeded errands, and allowing whatever arises within to be processed without distraction. Such experiences can clarify how the client reacts to being alone, exposing fears, resentments, or yearnings. Accompanied by professional guidance, these glimpses into the psyche can promote breakthroughs in understanding long-standing issues. Nonetheless, caution is advised. People grappling with severe mental health challenges, such as profound depression or post-traumatic stress, may need consistent support and should not abruptly isolate themselves. The constructive use of solitude in therapy relies on balancing alone time with professional supervision and social support structures. Gender perspectives on solitude. Access to meaningful solitude has often been shaped by gender roles. In many historical contexts, men held social and economic advantages that afforded them private studies, or at least the capacity to step away from domestic chores. Women, confined by familial and societal expectations, frequently found it more difficult to secure time alone for intellectual, creative, or spiritual pursuits. Virginia Woolf's argument that women require a dedicated space and an income to explore their artistic faculties underscores how solitude is not solely a matter of temperament, but also social power. Although contemporary cultures have grown more egalitarian in various parts of the world, obstacles remain. Working mothers, for example, may struggle to find quiet time amid round-the-clock responsibilities. Cultural or religious norms in certain societies might still discourage women from traveling or living alone. Nevertheless, as gender norms evolve, more women are openly demanding and defending their right to solitude. They publish memoirs of solo travel, embrace personal retreats, or structure their family arrangements to allow for daily moments of reflection. In parallel, men also navigate changing expectations, with some finding it necessary to explain or justify their desire for solitude in a world that equates masculine success with constant action. Ultimately, the pursuit of solitude reveals broader questions about whose time is valued and how societies distribute personal freedoms. Ethical and social implications. Solitude is often considered a private affair, yet it contains ethical and social dimensions. If a person uses solitude to develop empathy, examine personal biases, and reflect on societal issues, the outcome can benefit the wider community. History is replete with leaders, political, spiritual, and educational, who turn to solitude for clarity during critical junctures. By stepping back from the fray, they returned with renewed vigor to address communal challenges. On the other hand, if solitude is pursued to disregard or belittle social connections, or if it fosters contempt for society, the consequence can be detrimental. There is a delicate balance between individual insight and community responsibility. In an era of global crises, from environmental concerns to humanitarian issues, some question whether encouraging solitude might diminish collective action. Advocates counter that solitude, properly integrated, enhances a person's capacity to engage with society. It offers respite from burnout, fosters original thinking, and can invigorate moral purpose. Extroversion, introversion, and solitude. Solitude is sometimes conflated with introversion, but a closer look reveals that these are related yet distinct concepts. Introversion pertains to where a person predominantly draws energy, from within or from social interaction, whereas solitude is a chosen action or condition, accessible to both introverts and extroverts. Extroverts can find solitude beneficial as well, especially if they feel overwhelmed by constant stimulation. The difference is often in the duration or frequency. An introvert may need extended quiet time to recharge, while an extrovert might prefer shorter intervals of solitude, punctuating more frequent social engagement. Susan Cain's influential work, which highlights the strengths that introverts bring to society, underscores that many creative, thoughtful contributions arise when individuals are given space to think deeply on their own. The takeaway is not that solitude is best for introverts alone, but that certain tasks and insights flourish in solitude for anyone willing to embrace it. On an organizational level, respecting diverse needs for alone time can enrich group projects and foster mutual understanding. Critiques of solitude. Not everyone endorses solitude as uniformly beneficial. Critics have voiced concerns that can be grouped under several themes: reinforced echo chambers. Without the checks and balances of social feedback, individuals might entrench themselves in personal biases or fixations. Solitude could magnify rigid thinking if a person refuses input from others. Magnified loneliness. Solitude's positive framing requires a voluntary element. If people yearn for friendship or family bonds but cannot access them, calling their situation solitude may trivialize a painful predicament. Undermine social fabric. A society that emphasizes individual pursuits at the expense of collective well-being might see an erosion of shared civic responsibilities. Encouraging too much solitude could theoretically harm community life if it becomes a widespread avoidance of public matters. These critiques highlight the need for discernment. Solitude is neither a cure-all nor an inherently harmful practice. Its real impact depends on one's motivations, psychological health, and cultural context. Contemporary cultural shifts. Modern culture appears ambivalent about solitude. On one hand, digital platforms and work environments continuously push for responsiveness. People are often lauded for multitasking or staying connected. On the other hand, a rising tide of mindfulness programs, yoga studios, and self-care movements attests to a yearning for quiet reflection and respite from overstimulation. Terms like digital detox, slow living, and off the grid are used widely to describe intentional breaks from technology. Retreat centers offering silent weekends or even longer stretches without talking have surged in popularity. Authors and thought leaders highlight the importance of blocking out deep work time, uninterrupted intervals when knowledge workers can delve into complex tasks without distractions. At a social level, this shift is complicated by the profit motives of tech companies whose business models rely on constant engagement. With smartphone apps designed to spark frequent check-ins and social platforms employing subtle psychological hooks, it can feel like an uphill battle to claim even a handful of minutes for solitude. This very tension lends solitude an air of rebelliousness, as if stepping away from the digital stream is an act of reclaiming personal autonomy. Personal testimonies and case studies. Personal narratives often illustrate how solitude shapes real lives. A corporate executive might report that daily meditative breaks allowed them to reduce burnout and make more ethical decisions at work. An avid traveler might speak of hiking solo along remote trails, discovering unanticipated self-confidence in the face of nature's challenges. A grieving individual might find that only in absolute quiet could they process their loss, experiencing waves of sorrow and remembrance unimpeded by social expectations. Stories also emerge from more severe contexts. Individuals suffering from trauma may require carefully structured intervals of solitude where they can journal or express emotions without witnesses. If guided properly, this can be healing. When done impulsively or without a support network, it could exacerbate post-traumatic stress. In short, personal testimonies confirm solitude's potency. It can catalyze growth or intensify struggles, depending on how and why it is used. Solitude in education and child development. The role of solitude in child development continues to intrigue psychologists and educators. Too often, modern schooling and parenting strategies fill every moment with structured activities. Children rarely experience the boredom that once prompted imaginative play, yet research suggests that unstructured time alone fosters self-reliance and creativity. Solitary play allows children to invent games, storytelling scenarios, or art projects that stem from their interests rather than adult directives. Approaches such as the Montessori or Waldorf methods incorporate ample freedom for children to work individually, exploring tasks at their own pace. Teachers observe rather than constantly direct, intervening minimally. In such contexts, children develop a sense of autonomy and can delve deeply into an activity without peer interruptions. Family life can mirror these principles if parents encourage quiet reading, journaling, or daydreaming in addition to group outings. Encouraging healthy solitude does not mean ignoring social development. Children also need to learn cooperation, empathy, and conflict resolution. Indeed, the best educational models strike a balance. Children feel secure in their relationships, but also discover that time alone can be a wellspring of creativity, self-soothing, and independent thought. The future of solitude. As new technologies continue to blur the boundaries between the physical and virtual realms, solitude's future may become even more nuanced. With virtual reality headsets offering digital recreations of nature and social experiences, one might ask, if we can simulate a mountain cabin or a quiet forest in a headset, does that count as genuine solitude? The distinction between real-world isolation and mediated virtual experiences could grow increasingly complex. Large-scale global issues, from pandemics to climate change, can heighten or reduce the drive for solitude. On one hand, crises can bring people closer, reinforcing communal values. On the other, individuals coping with stress might crave moments of escape turning to solitary pursuits for sanity in a chaotic world. Future generations might evolve new cultural norms around solitude, blending it seamlessly into daily rituals or forging specialized institutions for mindful withdrawal. Beyond speculation, the essential spirit of solitude will likely endure. Human beings, no matter how technologically advanced, contain layers of emotion and thought that can only be explored through some degree of introspection. Whether it occurs in a digital environment, a traditional hermitage, or a simple bedroom, solitude remains a gateway to the mysterious depths of human consciousness, and perhaps to a more authentic engagement with the planet and the communities we inhabit. Conclusion. Solitude endures as a timeless phenomenon woven into the cultural and spiritual history of humanity. It has inspired monks, philosophers, poets, and artists, as well as countless ordinary individuals who find that moments alone are essential for understanding their minds and hearts. Across ages and continents, solitude surfaces again and again as a tool for self-awareness, a refuge for emotional restoration, and a platform for creative and spiritual discovery. At its healthiest, solitude offers more than personal enrichment. It can sharpen ethical insight, strengthen social bonds by reducing emotional neediness, and prompt contributions to culture and knowledge that might never have emerged in the constant clamor. Yet solitude's power also brings responsibility. If chosen for escapism, it can wall off individuals from realities they need to confront. If imposed or prolonged against one's will, it can crush the spirit with loneliness. If romanticized, solitude may become an unattainable ideal that fails to acknowledge the real challenges of living alone. In our modern context, buzzing with digital connections, shaped by global crises, and grappling with shifting societal norms, solitude remains a vital practice. It stands as a reminder that beneath the waves of social media and the demands of professional life, there is an interior life waiting to be explored. By honoring solitude with a sense of balance and self-awareness, individuals can create intervals of quiet that refresh creativity, deepen understanding, and even reignite compassion for others. And so we circle back to that early dawn scene, the mist over still water, the whispered hush of a sleeping world, the lone figure standing silently on the shore. This image is neither lonely nor isolating. Rather, it suggests the possibility that in stillness, a person may discover the richest melodies of the soul. The motionless expanse of water mirrors the depths within. For those willing to step across the threshold of solitude, even for a few minutes at a time, the gifts can be as profound as the ancient mountain, or as subtle as a single drop of dew catching the first rays of morning light. May we each find our version of that dawn-lit shore, whether it is in a silent retreat, a calm pause between tasks, or the quiet corners of our homes. May we learn through solitude to listen more intently to the voice of our hearts, emerging with a clearer vision of how to live. Seriously, we strive to meet modern standards, constant work, perfect efficiency, endless productivity, becoming little more than cogs in a massive machine. As William Shakespeare once wrote, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. We forget that play and playfulness are fundamental human needs. It's no wonder that boredom and fatigue come so easily, robbing us of spontaneity, sincerity, and ardor. To counteract this, we must make room for the fool's spirit. Of course, we must also keep a sage's balance, someone wise enough to know his limitations and laugh at himself every so often, so that we avoid falling into total foolishness and neglect. Archetypes aren't mechanical constructs. They're living, breathing images bound to us through emotion and experience. The fool's nature is complex, and different writers have described it in various ways. Sometimes as a dim-witted person, inarticulate, incapable of complying with typical social standards, and sometimes as a soul who retains an instinctive purity and innocence of heart. The term fool originates from the Latin follis, referring to a pair of bellows blowing empty air. When applied to a person, it implies a vacant mind or lightweight thoughts. Yet bellows also deliver the oxygen needed for combustion. In much the same way, the fool has a special knack for igniting our spirits. In 1511, Erasmus of Rotterdam released the highly influential In Praise of Folly, a brilliant and incisive exploration of the fool in Western literature. In this work, Folly introduces herself, and since nobody praises her, she begins by showering praise upon herself, claiming that life would be unbearably dull without her presence. She lampoons everyone, prompting Erasmus's friends to warn him about risking conflict with church authorities. Even so, religious figures found it entertaining. Friendship and marriage both contain a touch of foolishness, as we often forgive each other's flaws and dismiss them as minor failings compared to everyone else's mistakes. Intellectuals can also appear foolish in their obsessive chase for knowledge, devoting endless hours to libraries and research, believing they're doing invaluable work, only for a small circle of peers, a century later, to admire their books. Folly compares philosophers to theatre critics who ruin the illusion on stage by exposing the actors' genuine identities. They are dull, vexing presences. Philosophers fail to appreciate how comforting illusions can be, even if they distort the truth. By contrast, the fool appears far more free and joyful, unencumbered by overly sober insight. Fools liven up the crowd, and, interestingly, they're always truth-tellers, because they lack the cunning required to lie or manipulate. Nothing else brings more delight into life than the mirth that accompanies play and laughter. Folly, Erasmus suggests, isn't just universal. It's necessary and even beneficial. Being human inevitably means embodying some degree of foolishness, and recognizing this is the height of true wisdom. The fool conjures a longing for a simpler existence and a form of wisdom that springs more from the heart than the mind. Occasionally, the straightforward and guileless manage to pierce deeper truths than those burdened by strict convention and learned formulas. Sometimes we find more value in plain folk sayings than in a formal treatise. Fyodor Dostoevsky remarks, "The wisest of all, in my opinion, is he who can, at least once a month, consider himself a fool, an ability hardly known nowadays." In literature, characters often disguise their sharp intellect with lunacy, just as the insane may deliver profound insights. The wise fool is a contradictory notion that denotes a character labeled foolish, but gifted with genuine wisdom. Wise individuals are sometimes labeled insane by others who want to stifle unwelcome truths or punish them for their frankness. One emblem of this archetypal wise fool is Socrates. Through the Socratic method, he unmasked the folly of those claiming to be wise, asserting that his wisdom stemmed from acknowledging his ignorance, realizing one's ignorance is itself a form of knowledge. Shakespeare famously wrote, "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool." There are essentially two ways to be fooled: accepting what isn't true, or denying what is. When a difficult truth must be spoken, and those in power cower before it, the fool steps up. There's something undeniably heroic in that. A fool who speaks a taboo truth offers instant relief, since people sense the words must be heard. Broadly, there are two categories of fools: the natural fool, who lacks social awareness and blurts out the truth without realizing the norms he's breaking, and the professional fool, who cleverly packages harsh truths in humor and wit. One of these archetypes follows his heart, the other his mind. The greatest fools are sometimes shrewder than those who mock them. The fool never fears speaking the truth. The fool's hidden secret is that he's not truly a fool at all. As William Blake succinctly put it, if the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise. The fool, clown, and trickster resemble one another in many ways. They provoke laughter, prompting a rush of comic release. Yet there is a tension. foolishness and non-foolishness, order and chaos.
Wonder why I spend each lonely night dreaming of a song. That melody haunts my reverie, and I am once again with you. When our love was new, and each kiss an inspiration.
What initially seems like a humorous prank might turn into a sober warning. Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard tells a parable of a theatre catching fire backstage, where the clown tries repeatedly to alert the audience. They applaud him, thinking it's part of the show. The more he insists, the more they cheer. Kierkegaard goes on to suggest this is how the world may end, to universal applause from those who think it's just another act. This illustrates how professional fools can unmask truths about our trajectory, though their message often goes unheeded. Ironically, many clowns emerge from personal tragedy. The paradox linking comedy with anxiety or depression is called the sad clown paradox. Comedy can be a defense, diffusing pent-up rage or aggression. While people may laugh, they simultaneously feel sympathy or even revulsion, leading to conflicted emotional reactions. Some individuals suffer from coulrophobia, an overwhelming fear of clowns. In modern times, clowns have become routine villains in stories and films, perhaps because they're under pressure to be comedic all the time. The clown surrenders his comfort, forced to wear a painted mask and replay the same routine. This can fragment his psyche, giving rise to his shadow self. The malevolent clown archetype is famously portrayed by the Joker, a pop culture emblem of villainy. Medieval drama sometimes saw clowns not just entertaining the crowd, but also hauling spectators off into a hellmouth, a monstrous gateway to hell, frightening viewers in the process. They balance their light-hearted side with a darker edge. While the fool and the trickster share similarities, there are also distinctions. Overall, the fool is typically innocent and sweet-natured, incapable of harming anyone. The trickster, however, delights in deception, orchestrates ruses, and laughs at those who fall for them. Tricksters secretly relish the suffering or embarrassment of others. This is the German notion of Schadenfreude, or harm joy. A trickster might pretend empathy after someone fails, secretly savoring their humiliation. He snaps at any chance to trick another. The fool, in contrast, aims to laugh with rather than at people, or even to laugh at himself. Self-deprecating humor can break the ice, peeling away both one's facade and that of others, allowing genuine interaction to unfold. Although the fool enjoys entertaining and can be the target of jokes, the trickster's main motive is his amusement, often at someone else's expense. Yet the fool can hold on to hopefulness even in bleak scenarios, offering reassurance. When tension hangs thick in the air, the individual who is hurting might crack a joke, even at their own cost, to bring release not only for themselves, but for everyone else. The fool's humor is right out in the open. On the other hand, the trickster's motives are hazier. He pretends to be foolish, setting a trap for the unsuspecting. In medieval courts, jesters amused the aristocracy through music, storytelling, satire, comedy, and even feats like juggling and acrobatics. It was believed that keeping a fool around helped repel the evil eye. From a psychological perspective, this is no mere relic of superstition. It symbolizes a lasting truth. We do well to keep the fool close at hand, where we can watch him. That mischievous side of us can bring fresh perspectives and renewed vitality. Without the fool's impish humor, our inner world might grow barren. During the Middle Ages, the Feast of Fools erupted on New Year's Day among the lower clergy. For a short time, all social codes were abandoned, daily hierarchies flipped upside down, sacred rituals were shockingly parodied, clergymen were ridiculed, and the powerless could finally vent hidden anger, lust, and rebellion. Unsurprisingly, the church soon shut down these wild events. Yet in royal courts, fools enjoyed extraordinary freedom sanctioned by the monarch himself. They stood both within and outside the circle of power, able to poke fun at the very sovereign who employed them, strictly in jest of course. Anyone bold enough to undermine accepted norms is deemed a fool by the timid, who'd never risk looking ridiculous. To advertise his unique privileges, the fool wore an imitation of the king's regalia, the fool's cap, with bells, and a mock scepter called a bauble. Often featuring a miniature head, the bauble could say things the jester might prefer not to speak himself. Because of their close position to the ruler, jesters could speak freely, unafraid of backlash, though a few did take it too far and met the executioner's blade. Fools uphold values the collective discards because they clash with social codes. Branded incompetent and rebellious, they're shunned as outcasts. But such an outsider figure is vital for cultural evolution, as they rattle foundations and challenge complacent assumptions. In many historical courts, fools suffered physical deformities, originally seen as burdens upon poor families. Nobles turned these individuals into natural fools, purely for entertainment. The deformity was sometimes viewed as a divine mark, so dwarfs, hunchbacks, and similarly different folk served as court fools. Dwarfs in particular were highly prized, and often sent as exotic gifts among royalty. Placing a dwarf by the king visually inflated his majesty. Yet despite their external differences, these individuals often held an uncommon depth of character. Their very isolation forced them to cultivate internal resources. In Shakespeare's tragedy, King Lear, the bond between the king and his fool is tinged with loyalty and need. The lonely king habitually asks for his fool's whereabouts and has him trail behind as a constant companion, almost like a second self. Fools upend hierarchies, living in a contradictory sphere where they are effectively outlaws, yet rely completely on the very society that supports them. Shakespeare's fools, resembling historical jesters, wield their wit to best their so-called superiors, albeit dramatized for the stage. The Parsifal legend from Arthurian lore showcases the path of a boy who must mature into a man. Named Parsifal, or young fool, he grows up in seclusion with his mother. When he sees knights for the first time, he's entranced, abandons his home, and begins a quest full of tests to transform him into a knight. Meanwhile, the Fisher King of the Grail Castle suffers from a wound so grim it keeps him alive, yet sterile, causing his domain to wither. This wound is akin to the pain an adolescent feels transitioning from childhood innocence to more painful self-awareness. Each youth endures such a Fisher King wound, a forced step from carefree bliss into the weightiness of knowledge. Nightly, the Holy Grail is paraded through the castle, bestowing each observer's deepest wish through its wine. Yet the Fisher King left out languishes in misery. Our capacity can be similarly blocked by profound wounds, so close to wonder, yet unable to partake of it. A jester's prophecy foretold that only an innocent fool's question could heal the Fisher King. One day, Parsifal encounters a lone fisherman on a lake. It is the king himself who directs him to the Grail Castle. That evening the king groans in agony, but Parsifal, taught by his mother not to ask prying questions, keeps silent. When dawn comes, the castle has vanished. Parsifal will spend 2 painful decades searching for it again. In the earliest telling, this is the end of the tale. We all bear this invisible inner castle, unseen unless we can shift our perception. Later retellings have Parsifal returning, finally asking, whom does the Grail serve? And thus healing the king and restoring fertility to the land. The Grail symbolizes our own life's meaning, and serving that higher self is its purpose. Psychologist Robert A. Johnson suggests a man must let the fool within treat his Fisher King wound. In Don Quixote, Miguel de Cervantes' seminal novel, a Spanish nobleman is driven mad by an obsession with tales of chivalry. Calling himself Don Quixote, he roams with an aging horse, hoping to protect the powerless and vanquish evil, only to cause more harm than good. He dedicates these deeds to a simple peasant woman, whom he envisions as an exalted princess, though she never appears. The term quixotic indicates a person with outlandish fantasies who chases impractical or romantic dreams. One iconic scene sees Don Quixote attacking windmills, mistaking them for towering giants, giving rise to the phrase tilting at windmills, meaning to confront imaginary adversaries. His grounded companion, Sancho Panza, tempted by promises of fortune, tags along on a donkey. Sancho's realism contrasts sharply with Don Quixote's idealism. Despite his delusions, Don Quixote is at times both articulate and perceptive, provided he avoids discussing knightly valor. It's a sobering reminder that even the sharpest minds can be swallowed by foolishness. As the story concludes, he regains sanity on his deathbed, despairing at the thought that his life was a silly fantasy. People now declare that he was a knight, ironically calling his sanity into question. Once his sustaining illusions vanish, he dies of too much reality. This raises the quandary: is it better to face the harsh truth and be wretched, or dwell happily in a fool's paradise? Dostoevsky explores this tension in The Idiot, painting a protagonist who is both saintly and naive, plunged into a corrupt society. Prince Mishkin, fresh from a Swiss clinic for epilepsy and idiocy, returns to Russia. His innocence and honesty collide with a world dripping in avarice, manipulation, and selfishness. He speaks, bearing his heart openly, and people dismiss him as an idiot, though he demonstrates profound spiritual insights. In contrast is Ippolit, a dying nihilist and atheist who rails against humanity, nature, and God, claiming, "It is better to be unhappy and know the worst than to be happy in a fool's paradise." Mishkin can't comprehend choosing unhappiness. Rather than philosophize, he spends time with sinners, guiding them with empathy. Redemption emerges as a central motif, a process of saving the spirit from sin through humility and mercy. Dostoevsky frames this in the novel's renowned phrase, "Beauty will save the world." We often encounter fairy tales with three brothers, where the youngest is the village simpleton. Naturally, he ends up the heroic figure. This rashly brave fool goes where cautious souls will not, thereby winning the princess and half the kingdom. The fool combines common sense, a hint of madness, and pure folly to work small miracles, unless he leans too far toward foolishness, in which case disaster awaits. One of Russia's most famous folk heroes is Ivan the Fool. Leo Tolstoy's short story named after him draws on this character. Ivan is the family's youngest peasant son, exploited by others because he's naive, kind, and quick to forgive, even when it costs him. His brothers chase money and military glory, while Ivan, living simply, tends to his father and mute sister, farming and caring for the homestead. When his siblings run short of funds, they demand their inheritance. Their father objects, but Ivan consents anyway. The old devil, annoyed by the brothers' harmony, dispatches little devils to sow strife. The devils succeed in stirring the two brothers, but when they plague Ivan, his innocence and perseverance overcome every challenge. The three devils keep failing, and, cornered by Ivan, each begs for mercy. He casually says, "God bless you," causing them to vanish. Granted magical boons in return for sparing their lives, Ivan conjures gold from leaves and armies out of straw, which he gives away generously. Even the old devil is bested in the end. Though Ivan is immersed in folklore and fantasy, while his brothers rely on practical reasoning, Ivan marries the Tsar's daughter. The one who possesses nothing attains everything, and the fool emerges triumphant. In tarot, the fool is often depicted as a carefree traveller, clutching a white rose of purity and innocence, his worldly belongings in a tiny sack. Cheerfully gazing upward, he imagines all the thrilling possibilities before him. Meanwhile, a faithful dog yaps at his heels, trying to warn him about the cliff's edge. Tarot's beginnings trace to 15th century Italian playing cards, trionfi, used in elaborate festivals, later called tarocchi, derived from taroche, meaning foolishness. Accordingly, the tarot can be thought of as the fool's journey. By the 18th century, these cards entered occult practice, with mystics naming them arcana. Of the 78 cards, the first 22 are major arcana, culminating in the world, symbolized by a large laurel wreath. There the Fool at last becomes the cosmic dancer and the anima mundi, or world soul. Yet as the journey completes, it begins all over again, a lifelong loop. The Fool is both the starting point and the finale. He embodies the hero who leaps away from comfort into uncharted territory. Much like the monomythic hero's journey, he ventures into an unknown realm, battles the dragon of his deepest fear, and obtains the elusive treasure. Symbolically, it's a spiritual or psychological death and rebirth, forging a more capable self. Returning home, he offers this new wisdom or gift, healing, love, or hard-earned experience to others. The Fool is an eternal wanderer, spirited and deathless, occupying the highest rank among the tarot trumps because he is always in process. He sparks the entire saga, what Jung described as individuation, the road to wholeness. Tarot images can be used in a Jungian approach called amplification, which boosts the symbolic volume of dreams or visions by referencing myth, religion, alchemy, fairy tales, and art. Appropriately, the Fool's number is 0, and 0's power lives in its circular shape, an emblem of infinity. The Egyptian Ouroboros, a snake devouring its tail, stands for perpetual return, the timeless unity of all things. One is all, and all is one. Sages often say, God is an infinite sphere whose center is everywhere, circumference nowhere. The circle with a dot at its center is the universal sign for the sun, the source of life and energy, and represents the cosmic egg from which all creation flows. It is paradise, a blissful state before consciousness dawns. Once upon a time, we lived in this unity, and we yearned for it still, as evidenced by our nostalgia for childhood. Jung denotes the dot as the ego, or conscious mind, and the encompassing circle as the self, the core of our entire psyche, both conscious and unconscious. He writes, "I do not create myself, I happen to myself." Over centuries, the Fool evolved through myriad artistic renderings. Today's modern Joker in standard card decks springs from this archetype, once displayed as beggar, madman, or fool. The Visconti Sforza tarot from the 15th century, among the oldest we have, depicts the Fool in tattered clothes, shoeless, holding a stick, feathers in his hair, suggesting the wild man. The Solabusca tarot from the same era shows a fool wearing feathers in his headdress while playing a bagpipe. In the German Hofämterspiel, the Fool similarly appears barefoot, with a jester's hood ringing with bells. Another deck, the Mantegna Tarocchi, calls him Misery, the beggar, an old man leaning on staff while small animal yanks on his clothing. He's in such harmony with instinct that he doesn't need to watch where he's going. His inner animal guides him. Some antique French cards blindfold him, reinforcing his reliance on insight rather than sight. The Swiss variation had the Fool fully dressed in jester garb with a wand, while the Tarot of Marseille, popular in the 17th and 18th centuries, included a jester with torn pants, chased by an animal, or enthralled by a butterfly. Finally, the Rider-Waite Tarot deck from 1909 by Pamela Coleman Smith, under A.E. Waite's guidance, presents the now classic image of the Fool teetering on a cliff edge. Psychologically, the Fool stands at the threshold of transformation. Nothing commences without that first foolish leap. Inventors and geniuses, as some have noted, are often condemned as fools at the start and sometimes at the end of their careers. The Zen Buddhist notion of Shoshin, or beginner's mind, contrasts with the closed-minded expert who thinks he has nothing left to learn. In that open, childlike mind, countless possibilities thrive, far beyond the narrow confines of perceived mastery. This openness paves the way for silence, a quietness in which the numinous can be heard. If we can't bother listening to a neighbour, we certainly won't detect the subtler voice of silence. Though the senses have enormous potential, we rarely refine them. Jung once claimed, "The soul demands your folly, not your wisdom." Embarking on a journey of self-discovery is traditionally seen as silly. We're expected to progress linearly, school, career, marriage, and so forth. Anyone who breaks this pattern is quickly labelled a fool, destined for nothing but failure. Often, the biggest hurdle is the very first step. The ancient Chinese saying rings true: a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. The fool pictures the thrilling escapades that lie ahead, unconcerned by the possibility of mistakes, while overthinking fosters fear and stasis. The fool's impulsive optimism spurs action. We tend to be terrified of the unknown, dreading imagined catastrophes so much that we'd prefer familiar failures, forfeiting success. This obsessive worrying leads to more suffering in our minds than in reality. Ironically, failure can open unforeseen doors to outcomes we never conceived. The alchemist insisted, "Where you least want to look, there lies what you seek." The fool dives in head first, naive to the hazards that might otherwise paralyze him. He remains present, acknowledging reality as it unfolds, never shying away from new vistas. Even when he stumbles repeatedly, he continues onward. No truly remarkable person has escaped making mistakes. In the end, it's the journey itself that shapes us, not the ultimate destination. T.S. Eliot wrote, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." But the fool can overdo it, failing to pause for reflection and inadvertently plunging off the cliff's edge. He stands precariously between hope and recklessness. We have that internal guardrail that might scream, "Don't do that, you'll humiliate yourself. That's a silly question, everyone will mock you." Yet this same voice can morph into the fool's dark side, shackling us to conformity and timid acceptance, snuffing out our true longings. If we allow the fool within us to remain unconscious, it sparks envy, shame, and other maladies. In the progression toward individuation, the fool both motivates and resists. He's linked to the archetype of eternal youth, the child in us that survives adulthood. That youthful spark can feed creativity and vibrancy, or, if unbalanced, confine us in perpetual adolescent fantasies, making life feel like a prison. Tightly related is the child archetype. Children, less stifled by a polished persona, obey their impulses more than societal demands, the Freudian superego. Meanwhile, the madman has partly escaped the rational world. Both child and madman are liberated, to some degree, from life's constant pressures, the endless barrage of sensory input that overwhelms the rest of us. The fool carries a light heart, a buoyant optimism, and doesn't take life too seriously. Nietzsche once said that maturity means rediscovering the seriousness one had as a child at play. Jungian analyst Marie-Louise von Franz likens the fool to Jung's inferior function, the least developed side of our psyche among the four core functions: thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensation. Yet the fool signifies more than mere inferior function. He's a deeply religious figure in myth, retaining something of primordial completeness. Von Franz noted that when a fourth figure appears in a group of four mythic characters, that one is frequently the fool. He's both the part of us we belittle for being unadapted and silly, and the vital link to our unconscious wholeness, containing the hidden key to deeper integration. Standing at the boundary between our mundane reality and the realm of imagination, he leads us to a wellspring of renewal. Our inferior function can mend the Fisher King wound. The holy fool dares to stand firm in truth and love, however much ridicule or rejection it brings. He exhibits an unbreakable integrity, abiding in authenticity regardless of how others react, defying conformity out of pure courage. He doesn't judge or measure people by ordinary values and is wholly present to the person in front of him. Because he cannot be halted, he poses a serious challenge to the powers that be. Everyone is beloved by God, so each has the potential to flourish in spirit. Fools for Christ's sake is a phrase from St. Paul, who declares that God has turned worldly wisdom into foolishness. In the eyes of some, the proud wise are revealed as actual fools. Practicing foolishness for Christ can entail renouncing earthly riches for a spiritual life, even at the cost of humiliation or scorn. The fool is a forerunner of the Saviour. Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise. When you hear the word fool, you might think of a court jester dressed in bright, mismatched clothes, bells jingling on the tip of their hat, prancing around the king's court, making everyone laugh. Or maybe you picture the classic clown at a birthday party, juggling plates and dropping them left and right. In modern slang, calling someone a fool can be a casual insult, like saying they're clueless or that they've made a silly mistake. But the concept of the fool in psychology and philosophy goes far deeper than just clowning around or being the butt of jokes. The fool often embodies paradox, bridging the gap between chaos and wisdom, ignorance and insight, sincerity and pretension. So let's dive into the psychology of the fool, explore its philosophical roots, and see how it all applies to our everyday lives. A brief historical peek at the fool. The medieval court jester. Historically, the fool, or jester, had an interesting position in medieval courts. While everyone else had to carefully watch their tongue in front of powerful kings, queens, and nobles, the fool was granted a special kind of freedom. They could mock the king to his face, point out hypocrisy in the court, and poke fun at political issues that nobody else dared to mention. Why? Because it was all done in jest, or at least that was the official story. The fool's job was to entertain, but hidden within their jokes was often a sliver of truth, sometimes a big chunk of it. They could say the unsayable because their role was, in a sense, to be the official truth-teller, albeit disguised in foolishness. It's ironic, right? The one person who's considered the least serious has the most freedom to speak without consequences. Scholars have pointed out that medieval jesters were closer to satirists or stand-up comedians in modern times, using humour to shine a light on inconsistencies and corruption. Thus, while the jester outwardly displays silliness, internally there's often a sharp awareness of human nature and social politics. Shakespeare's fools. It's hard to talk about fools without mentioning William Shakespeare. Characters like the fool in King Lear or Touchstone in As You Like It are pivotal, because while they appear comical, they serve as the emotional or moral compass of the play. Shakespeare's fools are wise observers who comment on the action of the play, often speaking in riddles or witty puns. They make the audience laugh, but behind that laughter is the sting of truth. Shakespeare harnessed the archetype of the fool to underscore that sometimes wisdom comes in unexpected, unconventional forms. Jungian perspectives. Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, universal, symbolic figures that appear across different cultures in myths, dreams, and art. While the trickster is a more formally identified Jungian archetype than the fool, there's a lot of overlap. Tricksters, or fools, often challenge norms, invert social rules, and reveal hidden truths. They do so through pranks, jokes, or unpredictable behavior. Where the magician might carefully harness the energy, the fool might just stumble into it, ironically discovering something groundbreaking in the process. In Jungian psychology, the trickster, or fool, could reflect our unconscious desire to break free from rigid structures or moral codes that limit our growth. Sometimes we need a little folly, within reason, to disrupt staleness and bring creativity into our lives. Jung believed that confronting the trickster within us, acknowledging those playful, chaotic impulses, can lead to greater individuation, the process of integrating all aspects of our personality into a balanced whole. The fool and the shadow self. Another interesting angle in depth psychology is the fool's potential to represent aspects of our shadow self. The shadow, according to Jung, is the part of us we're unaware of, or that we repress because it doesn't align with our conscious self-image. Sometimes we see traits we dislike in others more easily than in ourselves. We call them foolish, immature, or irresponsible. Perhaps we are, deep down, envious of their freedom, or feel we'd like to be a bit more spontaneous ourselves. In that sense, calling someone else a fool might be a way of distancing ourselves from our own foolishness. Yet, ironically, we all contain a bit of the fool within us, the part that might let loose at a party, or the part that daydreams about running away from responsibilities and traveling the world with no set destination. Cognitive psychology. The Dunning-Kruger effect. Switching gears to more modern psychological research, let's bring up the Dunning-Kruger effect. While it isn't specifically about the fool archetype, it often manifests as a form of unrecognized foolishness. According to this effect, individuals who are incompetent at a task often overestimate their skill level. In other words, if you don't know what you don't know, you might think you know everything. Sound familiar? Perhaps you've had that co-worker who insists they're an expert in something, yet makes constant mistakes, and everyone but them seems aware of it. Though the Dunning-Kruger effect might seem purely negative, it underscores an important point about foolishness. It often comes from a place of ignorance, not necessarily from malice. People are often not out to trick you. They genuinely believe they're right, simply because they're blinded by their lack of knowledge. It's a psychological phenomenon that helps explain why some forms of folly aren't about comedic roles or wise jesters, but are about actual misunderstanding and overconfidence. Socratic wisdom and the unwise fool. Socrates famously declared that he knew nothing, and that made him the wisest man. This is paradoxical but deeply philosophical. Realizing how little we truly know is a form of wisdom. How does that tie into the fool? Often the fool is seen as ignorant or naive, but ironically acknowledging your ignorance can be a kind of superpower. The medieval fool or Shakespearean jester was free precisely because they didn't claim to be all-knowing. They asked bold questions, made outrageous remarks, and in doing so, revealed deeper truths. From a Socratic standpoint, perhaps the fool is foolish, because they're not adhering to the social script of, I know this, or I'm an expert in that. Instead, they blurt out the obvious questions everyone else is too proud or polite to ask. They might appear silly, but in a twisted way, they're the ones calling out the elephant in the room. Why are we doing this if it's not working? Or, the emperor has no clothes, is the famous fable that captures this idea. Erasmus in Praise of Folly. Ever read In Praise of Folly by Desiderius Erasmus? It's a satirical essay from the Renaissance era that personifies folly, or Stultitia herself, letting her speak about how the world is run by foolishness. Erasmus uses humour and irony to show how even powerful people are often governed by whims, vices, and short-sightedness. In a sense, folly is a goddess who stands up and says, "Hey, everything you're doing is silly and you don't even realise it." Like the jester, folly has the license to speak uncomfortable truths because she's just folly, right? This ties into the broader philosophical question. How much of what we take for absolute truth and importance is just an elaborate game, a social construct, or a mental habit that doesn't hold up to scrutiny? By praising folly, Erasmus is gently mocking humanity's tendency to take ourselves so seriously. Could it be that a dash of foolishness is essential for joy, love, and genuine human connection? Nietzsche and the child spirit. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about the three metamorphoses of the spirit: the camel, the lion, and finally the child. The child is a symbol of creativity, rebirth, and the ability to see the world anew. One could argue that the child, in Nietzsche's allegory, has a bit of the fool in them, innocent, open, unburdened by cynicism, ready to embrace possibility. Nietzsche suggests that after struggling under the burdens of conformity, the camel, and then rebelling and destroying old values, the lion, the ultimate stage is the child, the one who can say yes to life. Is that child also a fool? In some sense, yes. They're foolish enough to believe in wonder, to trust in new beginnings, and to play around without crippling fear of failure. While fool in everyday language is an insult, in Nietzsche's philosophical sense, it might just point to the uncorrupted spirit that doesn't yet know it's supposed to be serious or sophisticated. The fool in everyday life. The role of humor. Think of how often humor saves us in tense situations. When things get awkward, someone cracks a silly joke and boom, everybody exhales and the tension dissolves. We laugh because we recognize something absurd or contradictory. In many ways, humor is a coping mechanism, a way to handle the seriousness and stress of life. But behind the clownishness might lie a genuine willingness to question everything. For instance, stand-up comedians often say things on stage that many people find embarrassing to admit. They talk about weird bodily functions, awkward family encounters, or political issues. The result is a collective laugh that says, "Yeah, we're all a little messed up. Thanks for pointing that out." So the fool in everyday life can be the friend who always cracks jokes, but also manages to keep everyone grounded. This person might not be taken as seriously as the successful or straight-laced friend, but there's a unique kind of wisdom in humor, and it often reveals contradictions or comedic truths that everyone else overlooks. Learning through mistakes. One of the fool's most recognizable traits is messing up, and doing so spectacularly. Maybe they trip over their own feet, drop a plate of food on someone's lap, or forget something crucial. Yet there's a reason we say, you learn from your mistakes. A lot of psychological research supports the notion that failure is a key component of learning. The difference between a wise person and a fool, in this sense, might be the ability to reflect on those mistakes and grow from them. Being too afraid of looking foolish can paralyze us. It can keep us from trying new things or exploring fresh opportunities. Ironically, permitting ourselves to be a bit foolish can lead to greater creativity and growth. We might try a new hobby and realize we're terrible at it at first, but in the process, we discover something unexpected, or we gain a new perspective on life. Sometimes, you have to be willing to play the fool to learn something worthwhile. Social blunders and self-awareness. If you've ever said something that came out wrong at a party, or you've misunderstood a group's vibe, you might have felt a surge of embarrassment. "Oh no, I've made a fool of myself," is the classic phrase. But feeling like a fool is part of life, and it can boost your self-awareness if you approach it with the right attitude. Instead of beating yourself up, you can think, okay, what happened there? Did I misread social cues? Was I too eager to impress people? In social psychology, there's a phenomenon called the spotlight effect. It suggests that we often overestimate how much people notice our mistakes or flaws. We think the entire room is staring at us, when, in reality, most people are too busy thinking about themselves. Understanding this can help us realize that being foolish from time to time isn't as big a deal as we imagine. A bit of foolishness can make us more relatable and human. Embracing the fool within, a positive spin. Creative expression. Ever notice how creative people often say they felt out of place or foolish early in life because their ideas seemed weird or unconventional? Embracing the fool within can mean permitting yourself to explore your creativity without self-censorship. You might paint something abstract, write a bizarre short story, or take an improv class where you have to do silly things on stage. These acts can be liberating. They free you from the tyranny of the rational, linear mind. They let you tap into parts of your imagination you didn't know existed. Openness and curiosity. The fool archetype is often associated with openness to experience. If you're too worried about appearing foolish, you might miss out on the joys of spontaneity. Maybe you want to dance in public, sing karaoke, or backpack across a foreign country with no set plan. Doing these things carries the risk of looking naive or silly. But so what? Life is too short to be constantly fretting over how others perceive you. Sometimes, being the fool is the best way to truly live. Learning to laugh at yourself. Self-deprecating humor can be a powerful tool. When you laugh at yourself, you diffuse potential judgment from others while also embracing your imperfections. Rather than letting mistakes define or haunt you, you transform them into shared comedic moments. This doesn't mean you should degrade yourself or have low self-esteem, of course. It's more about lightheartedly acknowledging your humanity. As the phrase goes, "Blessed are the cracked, for they let in the light." By laughing at our cracks, we let in perspective and resilience. Resilience and adaptability. In some way, the fool is deeply adaptable. They stumble, fall, and pop back up again, sometimes with a grin on their face. From a psychological resilience standpoint, being able to roll with the punches is incredibly valuable. If you're too rigid, a single failure or embarrassment can break you. But if you're able to embrace some foolishness, to accept that mistakes and mishaps are part of the journey, you're more likely to handle stress without collapsing. Manipulative foolishness. The trickster can cross the line from beneficial disruption into manipulation. Think of con artists, scammers, or even toxic personalities who use humor or self-deprecation as a way to shield themselves from criticism. They might say offensive things and then claim they were just joking. This manipulative side of the fool weaponizes the protective shield that silliness can sometimes provide. Genuine cognitive limitations. It's also true that some forms of foolishness arise from real cognitive limitations or mental health challenges. Psychological conditions can impair judgment or self-awareness, leading someone to behave foolishly in ways that aren't under their control. It's vital to have empathy in these situations rather than romanticizing or ridiculing. Not all fools have the agency or self-awareness to navigate their foolishness positively. Reconciling foolishness and wisdom. Balance is key. Philosophers from Aristotle onward have praised the concept of the golden mean. Virtue often lies between extremes. On one end, we have hyper-rational seriousness, on the other, wild, reckless folly. Finding a balance might mean incorporating the fool's openness and spontaneity without losing the structure and foresight necessary for day-to-day life. If you're 100% fool all the time, you might lose your job, alienate people, and create chaos. But if you never let the fool out at all, you could become too rigid, missing out on creativity and joy. Embracing paradox. The fool stands at the crossroads of paradox. They can be both wise and ignorant, both liberating and chaotic, both beloved and mocked. Many great insights in philosophy and psychology come from accepting that life is often contradictory. The fool reminds us that we can be simultaneously silly and serious beings. We can hold multiple truths at once, and sometimes the lowest perspective offers the highest wisdom. In an age that celebrates expertise, mastery, and constant self-promotion, embracing the fool might sound counterintuitive, yet history, psychology, and philosophy all suggest that there's magic to foolishness. The fool is the one who can question the king without losing their head, the one who sees the world with fresh eyes, and the one who can bounce back from mistakes with a grin. Fools open doors that the rest of us, locked up in seriousness, might never notice. On the one hand, the fool can show us how unwise we truly are when we're puffed up by pride, groupthink, or unexamined assumptions. On the other, the fool can be the wise one who liberates us from our self-imposed limitations and helps us see the absurdity that underpins so much of life. Sometimes it takes a fool to stand up and shout, "This is nonsense," in a world that politely pretends everything is perfectly logical and under control. Of course, not all foolishness is beneficial, and we should be careful not to romanticize real ignorance or destructive behavior. True wisdom might lie in skillfully wielding our inner fool, balancing spontaneity with responsibility, and retaining the willingness to laugh at ourselves when needed. In philosophical terms, it's about affirming life in all its messiness. In psychological terms, It's about integrating the shadow of silliness, curiosity, and open-mindedness into our sense of self. Ultimately, we're all fools in certain areas, whether we admit it or not. Perhaps the best we can do is to embrace that fact with humility and a twinkle in our eye. After all, from the court jester whispering truths to the king, to the silly friend who breaks the tension at a dinner party, to the spiritual holy fool who sees beyond worldly pretensions, the fool is as essential a character in the drama of human life as the hero, the villain, or the sage. The next time you feel like an idiot for forgetting your keys or sending a text to the wrong person, remember that in stepping off the cliff with innocent wonder, like the fool in the tarot, you're also stepping onto the path of growth and discovery, and that's something worth smiling about.
I will always love you how I do. I'll let go of a prayer for you, just a sweet word. The table is prepared for you.
For decades, self-talk has been unfairly stigmatized in popular culture. Television and film often portray characters who talk to themselves as eccentric, unstable, or disconnected from reality. These depictions have contributed to a collective unease about acknowledging our self-directed conversations.
Wishing you Godspeed, glory. There will be mountains you won't move.
Yet underneath this cultural discomfort lies a profound psychological mechanism that shapes our thoughts, behaviors, and emotions in subtle and significant ways. The truth about self-talk is far more nuanced and fascinating than common misconceptions suggest. Far from being a sign of instability, self-talk represents one of the most fundamental tools humans have developed for navigating the complexities of consciousness. It serves as an interface between our conscious and unconscious minds, helping us process information, regulate emotions, solve problems, and motivate ourselves toward our goals. The nature of self-talk, more than just thinking. When I first began researching self-talk for this essay, I caught myself wondering about the difference between thinking and talking to oneself. The distinction might seem trivial at first glance, but it actually reveals something profound about how our minds operate. Self-talk isn't merely thinking, it's a specific form of cognitive activity that involves verbalized thoughts directed at yourself, unlike general thinking, which might involve abstract concepts, images, or emotions. Self-talk takes the form of words and sentences, a running commentary or dialogue that we direct inward. It can be silent and internal or audible and external, but it always involves language in a way that other forms of thinking might not. Consider how you might solve a complex problem.
Call it what you will, all are based on consideration for others, being kind to the other fellow in the little things of life as well as the big things. The youngsters who start to learn their manners early are fortunate youngsters. They may not think so at the time, but as they grow older, they realize that good manners can't be put on for special occasions only. What better place to see yourself as others see you than in the school hall between classes? Good manners must be practiced as a part of everyday living until consideration for others becomes as much a part of you as your right arm or your 2 feet. If your manners aren't the everyday regular part of you, when special occasions do come up, you may be uncertain, not show up to advantage, and sometimes your lack of assurance results in the embarrassment of doing the wrong thing.
Your thought process
At the
likely
school
involves visualizing potential solutions, recalling relevant information, and making intuitive leaps. But when you're truly stuck, you might find yourself asking, "What am I missing here?" or stating, "Let me think through this step by step." That verbal framing of your thoughts is self-talk, and it serves a distinct psychological purpose from other forms of cognition. According to psychologist Alain Morin, self-talk represents a crucial aspect of self-awareness. It allows us to observe and comment on our own behavior, thoughts, and feelings. In his research, Morin suggests that the ability to engage in inner speech enables a heightened form of self-reflection that non-verbal animals likely cannot experience. When we talk to ourselves, we're not just processing information, we're creating a narrative about our experiences that helps us make sense of the world and our place within it. This narrative function of self-talk is particularly evident when we face challenges. Think about a time when you were navigating a difficult situation, perhaps a conflict with a loved one or a professional setback. You likely found yourself mentally rehearsing conversations, considering different perspectives, and asking yourself questions like, "What should I do?" or "How do I feel about this?" These verbal thoughts help externalize complex internal states, making them more concrete and manageable. The psychologist Lev Vygotsky, whose work we'll explore more deeply later, believed that self-talk represents an internalization of social dialogue. In other words, the conversations we have with ourselves mirror the conversations we've had with others throughout our lives. This perspective highlights another key aspect of self-talk. It's not just a way of thinking, but a form of social interaction directed inward. What fascinates me about self-talk is how it blurs the line between speaker and listener. When you talk to yourself, you are simultaneously the one communicating and the one receiving the communication. This unique dual role creates a feedback loop that allows for real-time self-regulation and adjustment, an internal collaborative process that shapes how we navigate daily life. To better understand the multifaceted nature of self-talk, it helps to recognize its various manifestations. Sometimes it takes the form of rehearsal, as when we mentally practice what we'll say in an upcoming conversation. Other times it serves as instruction, guiding us through complex tasks or helping us maintain focus. It can function as motivation when we need encouragement or as evaluation when we're reflecting on our actions. And unfortunately, it can also become self-criticism when we judge ourselves harshly for perceived failures or shortcomings. Psychologist Judy Van Raalte has studied these different forms of self-talk extensively, particularly in athletic contexts. Her research reveals that effective self-talk tends to be task-focused rather than emotion-focused, specific rather than general, and positive rather than negative. For instance, a tennis player telling themselves, "Watch the ball" before a serve is engaging in more effective self-talk than one thinking, "Don't mess this up again." The former provides clear, actionable guidance, while the latter focuses on emotional concerns and potential failure. As we continue this exploration, it's worth considering your patterns of self-talk. Do you tend toward instruction, motivation, or criticism? Is your inner voice generally supportive or harsh? Does it focus more on solutions or problems? Becoming aware of these patterns is the first step toward cultivating a healthier relationship with your inner dialogue. The developmental journey. How we learn to talk to ourselves. One of the most charming aspects of spending time with young children is observing how openly they talk to themselves. A 4-year-old playing with blocks might narrate their actions aloud. Now I'm putting the red block on top. It needs to be straight. Oops, it fell. I'll try again. This external monologue, happening right out in the open without any self-consciousness, offers a window into how self-talk develops. The first person to systematically study this phenomenon was the Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky, whose work in the early 20th century continues to influence our understanding of cognitive development. Vygotsky was fascinated by what he called private speech, the audible self-talk that children engage in while playing or solving problems. Far from seeing this as immature behavior that should be discouraged, Vygotsky recognized it as a crucial developmental tool. According to Vygotsky's sociocultural theory, children learn to think by internalizing the speech patterns of adults around them. When a parent guides a child through a task, saying things like, "First, we need to find the puzzle pieces with straight edges," or "What color comes next in the pattern?" Serene, they're modeling not just how to complete the task, but how to think about it. Children absorb these verbal strategies and begin using them themselves, first externally through private speech and eventually internally as silent self-talk. I remember observing this process with my friend's daughter, Emma, who at age 5 would recite aloud the bedtime routine her parents had taught her. First brush teeth, then put on pajamas, then choose one book. She was essentially coaching herself through the sequence using language her parents had previously used to guide her. This external self-instruction gradually becomes less necessary as children master tasks, but the internal dialogue remains. Laura Burke, a developmental psychologist who has extensively studied private speech, found that children use more audible self-talk when facing moderately challenging tasks, those that push them just beyond their comfort zone. Too easy and there's no need for verbal guidance. Too difficult and verbal strategies alone aren't sufficient. This suggests that self-talk serves as a cognitive scaffold, helping bridge the gap between what children can do independently and what they can accomplish with support. What's particularly fascinating about this developmental trajectory is how it mirrors Vygotsky's concept of the zone of proximal development, the space between a learner's current abilities and what they can potentially achieve with guidance. Self-talk seems to function as a way for children to provide their guidance, extending their capabilities beyond what they could manage through nonverbal thinking alone. As children grow older, their private speech gradually becomes internalized. By around age 7 or 8, most children have largely transitioned from audible self-talk to silent inner speech. This doesn't mean they've stopped talking to themselves. Rather, the dialogue has gone underground, becoming part of their internal cognitive toolkit. The development of this inner speech coincides with improvements in self-regulation, problem-solving, and academic achievement, suggesting that the internalization of language plays a crucial role in cognitive maturation. This developmental pattern raises an interesting question. If self-talk begins as a social phenomenon that becomes internalized, might adults benefit from occasionally externalizing their thoughts again? Research suggests the answer is yes. Studies with adults facing complex problems have found that those encouraged to verbalize their thought processes often perform better than those who keep their thinking entirely internal. This externalization seems to help organize thoughts, reduce cognitive load, and identify errors or misconceptions that might otherwise go unnoticed. I've experienced this benefit myself when learning complex new software. Speaking out loud about what I'm trying to accomplish and the steps I'm taking helps me stay focused and catch mistakes more quickly than when I work in silence. It's as if hearing my voice creates just enough cognitive distance to see my process more objectively. Understanding the developmental origins of self-talk helps explain why it persists throughout our lives. Far from being a childish habit we should outgrow, self-talk represents the internalization of social guidance, a powerful cognitive tool that continues to serve us long after childhood. The key lies not in eliminating self-talk, but in cultivating forms that support rather than undermine our goals and well-being. Self-talk in adulthood, the silent symphony of inner speech. While children's self-talk is often charmingly overt, adult self-talk typically operates below the surface of awareness, a continuous background process that's easily overlooked despite its profound influence on our daily functioning. Psychologist Charles Fernyhough describes inner speech as the silent symphony of our minds, a rich tapestry of verbal thoughts that shapes our conscious experience in ways we rarely appreciate. What makes adult self-talk challenging to study is precisely this hidden quality. Unlike children's private speech, which can be directly observed and recorded, adult inner speech requires self-reporting methods that depend on awareness and recall. Despite these methodological challenges, researchers have made significant progress in understanding how self-talk functions in mature cognition. Perhaps the most immediate function of adult self-talk is planning and problem-solving. When faced with a complex task, we often mentally walk ourselves through the necessary steps, evaluate potential approaches, and anticipate obstacles. This verbal planning helps reduce cognitive load by externalizing parts of the thinking process, similar to how writing down a to-do list frees mental resources. I noticed this planning function recently while assembling furniture without instructions. As I tried to figure out which pieces connected where, I caught myself muttering, "This must be the front panel because of these pre-drilled holes, so that means this smaller piece connects here." This verbalization helped organize my perceptions and reasoning in a way that purely visual processing couldn't achieve. Beyond practical problem-solving, self-talk serves crucial emotional regulation functions in adulthood. When we experience setbacks or disappointments, our inner dialogue often determines whether we spiral into rumination or find constructive ways forward. Consider two possible responses to making a mistake during a presentation. "I'm so stupid, everyone must think I'm incompetent," versus "that didn't go as planned, but I recovered well and the main points still came across." The content of our self-talk in such moments significantly influences both our emotional state and subsequent behavior. Researcher Ethan Cross from the University of Michigan has conducted fascinating work on the relationship between self-talk and emotional regulation. His studies reveal that the grammatical perspective we use in self-talk, first-person I versus second-person you, or third-person use of our name, affects our ability to process difficult emotions. When people use distanced self-talk, second or third person, rather than immersed self-talk, first person, they show greater emotional regulation, reduced physiological stress responses, and improved performance on subsequent tasks. This finding suggests that simple shifts in how we talk to ourselves can create psychological distance from immediate emotions, allowing for more objective self-reflection. It's the difference between "I'm feeling overwhelmed" and "You're feeling overwhelmed, Rachel." The latter creates space between the experiencing self and the observing self, facilitating more adaptive responses. Another fascinating aspect of adult self-talk is its role in maintaining focus and controlling attention. Research with athletes consistently shows that instructional self-talk, "keep your eye on the ball," improves performance by directing attention to relevant task features. Similarly, students who use self-guiding statements while studying, the important point here is, tend to show better comprehension and retention than those who read passively. The psychologist Gary Lupian has demonstrated that naming objects changes how we perceive them. Verbal labels enhance visual processing of the labeled features. This research suggests that self-talk doesn't just reflect our perceptions, but actively shapes them, highlighting certain aspects of experience while downplaying others. When we tell ourselves what to look for or attend to, we're changing what we see. For many adults, self-talk also serves identity and narrative functions. We continually construct and revise our personal stories through internal dialogue, making sense of our experiences and connecting past, present, and future selves. Phrases like, "This is just like what happened last year," or "This isn't who I want to be," reflect this narrative-building process, through which we maintain a coherent sense of self across changing circumstances. Psychologist Dan McAdams has extensively studied these narrative aspects of identity, showing how the stories we tell ourselves shape our understanding of who we are. Self-talk provides the raw material for these narratives as we interpret events, attribute meanings, and envision possible futures through our inner dialogue. While self-talk serves many adaptive functions, it can also become maladaptive when dominated by negative content, excessive rumination, or unrealistic expectations. The psychologist Susan Nolan Hoeksema found that repetitive negative thinking, replaying failures, catastrophizing about the future, or dwelling on perceived inadequacies contributes significantly to depression and anxiety. This kind of rumination often takes the form of circular self-talk that offers no resolution. "Why do I always mess things up? What's wrong with me? I'll never get better at this." In contrast, constructive self-talk acknowledges difficulties while maintaining perspective and problem-solving orientation. "This is challenging, but I've handled similar situations before. What specifically can I do differently next time?" The difference isn't about being blindly positive, but about whether self-talk leads towards solutions and growth or deeper entanglement with problems. Understanding these various functions of adult self-talk, planning, emotional regulation, attention control, identity maintenance, and more, highlights its centrality to psychological functioning. Far from being an incidental feature of consciousness, self-talk represents a fundamental interface between our thoughts, emotions, perceptions, and behaviors, a continuous conversation that both reflects and shapes who we are. The science of self-talk, research insights and applications. The scientific study of self-talk has expanded dramatically in recent decades, moving beyond Vygotsky's early observations to encompass sophisticated experimental methodologies and real-world applications. This growing body of research provides valuable insights into how different types of self-talk affect performance, resilience, and well-being across various domains. One of the most robust findings comes from sports psychology, where researchers have consistently demonstrated that systematic use of self-talk enhances athletic performance. A comprehensive meta-analysis by psychologist Antonis Hatzigeorgiadis and colleagues examined data from over 3,000 participants across multiple sports and found that instructional and motivational self-talk significantly improved performance compared to control conditions. What's particularly interesting about this research is the specificity of effects. Instructional self-talk, elbow up, eyes on target, appears most beneficial for tasks requiring precision and technique, while motivational self-talk, you've got this, or power through, shows stronger benefits for tasks requiring strength, endurance, or confidence. This suggests that effective self-talk isn't one-size-fits-all, but should be tailored to the specific demands of the situation. I remember speaking with a collegiate swimmer who described how she uses different forms of self-talk throughout her races. Before the start, her self-talk focuses on staying calm and confident. Trust your training, enjoy the moment. During the race, it shifts to technical reminders, strong pull, high elbow, and during the painful final lengths, it becomes purely motivational. Keep pushing, you can do this. This strategic approach reflects a sophisticated understanding of how different types of self-talk serve different performance needs. Beyond sports, research has examined self-talk in educational contexts, showing that students who use metacognitive self-questioning, do I understand this concept? Or how does this relate to what I already know? Demonstrate better comprehension and retention than those who simply read or highlight material. This type of self-talk seems to promote active engagement with content, facilitating deeper processing and more durable learning. Educational psychologist Barry Zimmerman has documented how successful students use self-regulatory statements to guide their learning. Planning statements before beginning. I'll start with the most difficult problems. Monitoring statements during work. This isn't making sense yet. I need to slow down. And evaluative statements afterward. Next time I should create an outline first. These verbal self-guidance strategies correlate strongly with academic achievement across age groups and subject areas. In therapeutic settings, extensive research supports the efficacy of interventions targeting maladaptive self-talk patterns. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, one of the most empirically validated approaches to treating depression and anxiety, focuses explicitly on identifying and modifying negative automatic thoughts, the habitual self-talk that maintains psychological distress. Psychologist Aaron Beck, the founder of CBT, identified several common cognitive distortions that appear in the self-talk of people experiencing depression. All or nothing thinking. If I don't get an A, I'm a complete failure. Overgeneralization. I always mess things up. Mental filtering, focusing exclusively on negatives while ignoring positives. And catastrophizing, assuming the worst possible outcome. Through structured exercises, CBT helps people recognize these patterns in their inner dialogue and develop more balanced, realistic alternatives. The effectiveness of this approach is impressive. Hundreds of controlled studies show that CBT produces significant and lasting improvements in depression, anxiety, and other psychological conditions, with changes in self-talk mediating these improvements. In other words, when people's inner dialogue becomes more accurate and constructive, their emotional well-being improves accordingly. More recent research has examined the benefits of self-compassionate self-talk. Speaking to oneself with the same kindness and understanding one would offer to a good friend, psychologist Kristin Neff has shown that people who respond to setbacks with self-compassionate language, "This is hard right now, but everyone struggles sometimes," show greater emotional resilience than those who respond with harsh self-criticism or excessive self-focus. In one particularly revealing study, Neff and colleagues asked participants to recall a personal failure and then write a letter to themselves about it. Some were instructed to write with self-compassion, others with self-esteem boosting language, and others with no special instructions. Those in the self-compassion condition showed lower negative emotions and greater acceptance of responsibility than those in the other conditions, suggesting that kind self-talk doesn't promote complacency, as some might fear, but facilitates constructive engagement with personal shortcomings. The emerging field of positive psychology has contributed additional insights about self-talk that promotes well-being and flourishing. Researcher Barbara Fredrickson's broaden and build theory suggests that positive emotions expand cognitive and behavioral repertoires, creating upward spirals of growth and resilience. Self-talk that generates positive emotions, expressions of gratitude, appreciation of strengths, or recognition of meaning appears to facilitate these beneficial spirals. Martin Seligman's work on explanatory style, the habitual way people explain events to themselves, further illustrates how self-talk shapes resilience. People with an optimistic explanatory style tend to view setbacks as temporary, specific, and externally caused. "I didn't prepare adequately for this particular test." While those with a pessimistic style view them as permanent, pervasive, and personally determined. "I'm just not smart enough." These different narrative patterns expressed through inner dialogue significantly predict how well people bounce back from adversity. What makes all this research particularly valuable is its practical applicability. Unlike many psychological processes that operate entirely outside awareness, self-talk is accessible to conscious reflection and deliberate modification. With practice and guidance, people can learn to recognize unproductive patterns in their inner dialogue and cultivate alternatives that better serve their goals and well-being. The science is clear. Self-talk isn't just idle mental chatter, but a powerful psychological tool that shapes performance, emotional regulation, learning, and resilience. By understanding the research on effective versus ineffective self-talk patterns, we can make more informed choices about how we communicate with ourselves in different contexts and challenges. When self-talk goes awry, understanding negative patterns. Despite its many potential benefits, self-talk can become a source of suffering when it falls into certain destructive patterns. We've all experienced moments when our inner voice becomes our harshest critic, most pessimistic forecaster, or most persistent ruminator. Understanding these negative patterns, how they develop, how they're maintained, and how they affect us is essential for cultivating healthier internal dialogue. Perhaps the most common form of problematic self-talk is excessive self-criticism. Many people speak to themselves with a harshness they would never direct toward others, using language like, "You're so stupid, you never get anything right," or "What's wrong with you?" This internal verbal abuse can become so habitual that it feels like objective truth rather than a particularly toxic form of self-talk. Psychologist Paul Gilbert, founder of compassion-focused therapy, suggests that harsh self-criticism often develops as a misguided attempt at self-improvement or self-protection. If we grew up in environments where mistakes were met with criticism or rejection, we might internalize the belief that self-criticism is necessary for motivation or preventing future errors. Unfortunately, research consistently shows the opposite. Excessive self-criticism undermines motivation, impairs performance, and increases risk for depression and anxiety. I remember working with a talented graduate student who was paralyzed by perfectionism. Her self-talk before writing assignments included thoughts like, "This has to be brilliant or it's worthless," and "Everyone will see through you if you don't produce something exceptional." These internal demands created so much pressure that she struggled to write anything at all. Only when she began recognizing and challenging these harsh internal statements could she engage more productively with her work. Another destructive pattern is rumination, repetitive negative thinking about past events or current problems without moving towards solutions. Rumination often takes the form of why questions that have no clear answers. Why do I always feel this way? Why can't I just be normal? Why does this keep happening to me? This pattern keeps us mentally circling problems rather than resolving them, intensifying negative emotions without providing insight or relief. Psychologist Sonia Lyubomirsky has conducted extensive research on rumination, finding that it magnifies negative emotions, impairs problem solving, reduces social support, and interferes with instrumental behavior. People who ruminate are more likely to interpret ambiguous situations negatively, recall negative memories, and generate pessimistic predictions, creating a pervasive negativity bias in their thinking. Catastrophizing represents another problematic form of self-talk, characterized by predicting the worst possible outcomes and overestimating their likelihood or severity. Thoughts like, "This headache probably means I have a brain tumor," or "If I make a mistake in this presentation, my career is over," illustrate this pattern. Such thoughts trigger intense anxiety and often lead to avoidance behaviors that prevent the disconfirmation of these fears. Closely related to catastrophizing is black and white thinking, where self-talk frames situations in extreme all or nothing terms. This pattern shows up in thoughts like, "Either I do this perfectly or I'm a complete failure," or "If people knew the real me, they'd all reject me." Such dichotomous thinking creates impossible standards and overlooks the nuanced reality of most situations. Another subtle but harmful pattern is comparative self-talk, where we constantly measure ourselves against others or idealized standards. "Everyone else seems to have their life together," or "I should be further along by now." This form of self-talk keeps us focused on perceived deficiencies rather than progress or strengths. What makes these negative patterns particularly insidious is how they can become self-fulfilling prophecies. When our self-talk consistently predicts failure, rejection, or incompetence, we often behave in ways that make these outcomes more likely. Withdrawing from challenges, appearing insecure in social situations, or failing to prepare adequately because what's the point? The predictions then come true, seemingly confirming the validity of the negative self-talk. Additionally, negative self-talk patterns tend to operate automatically and outside of awareness. We don't choose to berate ourselves or catastrophize. These responses become habitual through repetition, especially when they're established early in life. By the time we're adults, negative self-talk can feel like an inherent part of our thinking rather than a learned habit that can be unlearned. The psychological impact of persistent negative self-talk extends beyond momentary distress. Research links habitual negative self-talk to increased vulnerability for clinical depression, generalized anxiety, social anxiety, eating disorders, and even physical health problems through stress-related physiological mechanisms. Our internal dialogue doesn't just reflect our psychological state, it helps create it. However, recognizing problematic patterns in our self-talk represents an important first step toward change. Psychologists have developed various approaches for identifying and modifying negative self-talk, which we'll explore in the next section. The key insight here is that while self-talk can become a source of suffering, its accessibility to consciousness also makes it amenable to intervention in ways that more automatic processes are not. By learning to recognize when our inner voice has become an adversary rather than an ally, we can begin the process of cultivating more balanced, realistic, and compassionate internal dialogue. This doesn't mean replacing negative thoughts with unrealistic positive ones, but rather developing a more accurate and nuanced inner conversation, one that acknowledges difficulties while maintaining perspective and supporting effective action. Transforming self-talk, strategies for healthier inner dialogue. Given the profound impact of self-talk on our emotions, behaviors, and overall well-being, learning to shape it constructively represents a valuable life skill. Fortunately, decades of clinical and research experience have yielded effective approaches for transforming problematic self-talk patterns. These strategies don't aim to eliminate negative thoughts, an unrealistic goal, but rather to create a healthier relationship with our inner dialogue. The first essential step in transforming self-talk is developing awareness of it. Much like meditation teaches us to observe our thoughts rather than being caught up in them, we can learn to notice our self-talk as it occurs. This mindful awareness creates space between ourselves and our thoughts, allowing us to recognize that self-talk represents verbal activity within our minds rather than definitive truth about reality. A simple but powerful practice involves pausing several times throughout the day to ask, "What am I saying to myself right now?" With regular practice, this check-in becomes more automatic, gradually building the habit of noticing inner dialogue as it unfolds rather than only in retrospect. Writing down recurring thoughts can further enhance awareness by making implicit patterns explicit. Once we can recognize our self-talk patterns, cognitive restructuring techniques offer systematic approaches for evaluating and modifying them. Developed within cognitive behavioral therapy, these methods help us examine the accuracy and helpfulness of our thoughts rather than accepting them uncritically. One effective restructuring approach involves treating negative self-talk as hypotheses to be tested rather than facts to be believed. When we catch ourselves thinking, "I'm going to fail at this," we can ask, "What's the evidence for and against this prediction? Have I handled similar challenges successfully in the past? What resources do I have available? What's the most likely outcome?" This evidence-based questioning often reveals that our negative self-statements are overgeneralizations or distortions rather than accurate reflections of reality. Another powerful technique involves imagining what we would say to a friend in a similar situation. Most of us speak much more harshly to ourselves than we would to someone we care about. If a friend made a mistake, we might say, "Everyone messes up sometimes. It doesn't define you." Yet when we make the same mistake, our self-talk becomes, "You're such an idiot. You always ruin everything." Consciously applying the same compassion to ourselves that we readily offer others can transform our inner dialogue. Psychologist Kristin Neff suggests a three-component approach to self-compassionate self-talk, acknowledging suffering, "This is painful right now," recognizing common humanity, "Everyone struggles sometimes, this is part of being human," and offering kindness, "What do I need right now to support myself through this?" This framework provides a structured alternative to self-criticism that maintains accountability while adding understanding and care. For those struggling with rumination, that tendency to mentally chew over problems without resolution, scheduled worry time can be surprisingly effective. This involves setting aside a specific period, perhaps 15 to 30 minutes, each day dedicated to worry and problem solving. When ruminative thoughts arise outside this time, we remind ourselves, "I'll think about that during worry time," and gently redirect attention to the present moment. This approach doesn't suppress legitimate concerns, but contains them within boundaries so they don't dominate our inner dialogue. Distance-creating language represents another valuable strategy for transforming self-talk. Research by Ethan Kross and colleagues demonstrates that using third-person pronouns, or our name when addressing ourselves, "Rachel, you're feeling anxious," rather than "I'm feeling anxious," creates psychological distance that facilitates more objective self-reflection. This simple linguistic shift helps activate the part of our brain associated with executive function rather than emotional reactivity. For particularly stubborn negative self-talk patterns, the paradoxical technique of thought labeling can be effective. Rather than trying to argue with or suppress negative thoughts, we simply label them as mental events. There's the "I'm not good enough" thought again, or "My mind is catastrophizing right now." This approach, drawn from acceptance and commitment therapy, acknowledges thoughts without getting entangled in them or treating them as accurate representations of reality. Positive psychology offers additional strategies for cultivating constructive self-talk. The 3 good things exercise, for example, involves identifying 3 positive experiences at the end of each day and reflecting on their causes. This practice gradually shifts our attention and self-talk toward appreciation rather than criticism or complaint. Similarly, regularly acknowledging personal strengths and progress, even incremental improvements, helps counterbalance our natural tendency toward negative focus. Implementation intentions, specific if-then plans, can help establish new self-talk habits. If I notice myself engaging in harsh self-criticism, then I will pause and ask what I would say to a friend in this situation. This approach leverages situational cues to trigger alternative responses, making desired self-talk patterns more automatic over time. Technology can also support self-talk transformation. Apps like Woebot or Mood Mission use cognitive behavioral principles to help users identify and challenge negative thought patterns. Some people benefit from setting phone reminders with encouraging messages or mantras that interrupt habitual negative self-talk with alternative perspectives. Perhaps most importantly, transforming self-talk requires patience and persistent practice. Our current patterns have developed over years or decades. Changing them is more like learning a new language than flipping a switch. Setbacks and lapses into old patterns are normal parts of the process rather than signs of failure. Self-compassion during this learning journey, speaking kindly to ourselves about our efforts to speak more kindly to ourselves, creates a foundation for sustainable change. The goal isn't to eliminate all negative self-talk, which would be neither realistic nor desirable. Constructive self-criticism and accurate recognition of problems have important roles in growth and adaptation. Rather, the aim is to develop a balanced inner dialogue characterized by accuracy, perspective, kindness, and helpfulness. Self-talk that supports rather than undermines our well-being and effective functioning. With consistent practice of these strategies, many people experience significant shifts in their relationship with their inner voice. What once served as a harsh internal critic can become a wise inner coach, still holding high standards and noticing areas for improvement, but doing so with encouragement and practical guidance rather than contempt or despair. Self-talk across contexts, tailoring inner dialogue to different challenges. One of the most powerful aspects of self-talk is its versatility, the way it can be adapted and customized for different situations and purposes. Just as we adjust our communication style when speaking with different people or in different settings, we can learn to tailor our inner dialogue to meet specific challenges and contexts. This section explores how self-talk functions across various domains of life and how we might optimize it for each. In performance contexts, whether athletic competitions, artistic performances, or professional presentations, effective self-talk tends to be concise, present-focused, and action-oriented. Research with elite athletes shows they use brief cue words or phrases that direct attention to relevant aspects of the task. Smooth rhythm for a golfer's swing, explode for a sprinter leaving the blocks, or breathe and flow for a gymnast beginning a routine. I once spoke with a concert pianist who described using different self-talk for different aspects of performance. During practice, her self-talk was analytical and instructional. The right hand needs to be lighter here, or feel the phrase moving toward the third beat. But during actual performances, she shifted to broader process cues like tell the story or let it sing that facilitated fluid execution without micromanaging. This strategic adjustment illustrates how self-talk can be adapted to different phases of skill development and performance. In learning contexts, effective self-talk often takes the form of questions rather than statements. Research on reading comprehension shows that students who ask themselves questions like, "How does this connect to what I already know?" or "What's the main point the author is making here?" retain and understand material better than those who read passively. This interrogative self-talk promotes active engagement with content and helps identify gaps in understanding. When facing creative challenges, expansive and exploratory self-talk seems most beneficial. Phrases like, "What if?" or "I wonder what would happen if?" open mental space for novel connections and possibilities. Creativity researchers find that self-talk that explicitly permits to experiment, "It's okay if this doesn't." It almost always unfolds in a predictable pattern. She gazes at you, yet the eyes studying you do not settle on who you are. They linger on who you might evolve into, at least in her private daydream. You can sense it in that spark behind her stare. Is it hope or is it appetite? You believe you're finally being truly seen. But what's happening is an appraisal. You are a blank canvas upon which she is already mixing her colors. The painting she intends to unveil, though, has never been about your genuine self. Carl Jung tried to warn you. He was no polished motivational guru whispering gentle encouragement. Instead, he wielded the scalpel of a lifelong surgeon of the psyche, dissecting the unconscious realm that hums beneath conscious thought. In that silent subterranean region, he unearthed an unsettling insight about romance. Women do not merely fall for men, they fall for an idea of men, a shimmering apparition stitched together by their own inner cinema. The unnerving part is that most of them aren't aware they're doing it. She isn't selecting you. She's electing the character she's drafted in her mind's screenplay, a puppet performing a role in her private epic. And once your lines no longer match that script, she swaps the actor, never the storyline. Jung called this inner projection the animus, the masculine presence living inside every woman. Left immature or untempered, that force turns tyrannical, driving her toward reckless lovers while dismissing good ones, pushing her to debate without reason, command without wisdom, and preach without accepting accountability. Jung never wrapped that truth in sugar. He called it a kind of spiritual possession. A woman moving through life, unaware that she's animated by a phantom masculine fantasy rather than her conscious will. Men, untrained to notice the charade, stumble right into the trap. You confuse desire with comprehension. You misinterpret being chosen for being understood. You drink in her promise that you're unlike any man before, not realizing you're simply the latest mask fitted to the same old plot she's rehearsed since childhood. When the masquerade disintegrates, when the illusion peels away, you're stranded, hurt, bewildered, humiliated, asking what you did wrong. You didn't fail. You merely ceased to be a believable actor in someone else's drama. Jung insisted that the sole means of escaping this psychological theatre lies in individuation, the lifelong forging of wholeness from within. And here's the prickly reality. Most men never embark on that quest. You are conditioned to harvest approval, chase applause, let a woman's regard define your significance. Persist in that habit, and you'll reprise the same part again and again, replaced whenever the audience yawns. Individuation isn't romantic, it's ruthless. It drags into daylight every feeble, insecure, neglected fragment you buried. It compels you to quit accusing women of failing to notice you and begin the far scarier work of noticing yourself. Jung grasped the truth most men dodge. Becoming a man has nothing to do with being selected, and everything to do with electing yourself. Worth is not bestowed by her affection. It is earned by standing firmly alone, alert, accountable, vibrantly alive. A man who has gazed into his own unconscious cannot be lured by projections. He no longer dances as a marionette for someone else's dream. He authors his own reality. Jung observed that the tragedy haunting modern males is not rejection, but their willingness to contort into shapes they assume will secure acceptance. You dignify it as compromise, as partnership, as love. Jung called it self-betrayal. Men who shun psychic growth become serfs to the feminine projection, bending like wet clay into whatever contour is demanded by women still enthralled to their inner animus. Soon you are less a man and more a mask, nodding, smiling, performing, until the day you forget the face beneath the disguise. Women pick up on this far more keenly than you imagine. The traits you hope will make her swoon, your obedience, predictability, endless availability, flip into the very qualities that drain her attraction. Why? Because, Jung revealed, the feminine instinct does not crave comfort. It is magnetized by mystery, by the risk of a man beyond her total grasp. The instant you remove your boundaries, your spine, your edges, you do not grow more lovable, you fade into translucence. Here lies the vicious circle. You dread solitude more than phoniness. You'd sooner abandon your essence than lose her. You'd rather act in a false narrative than confront the stage with no applause. Until you brave that solitude, you remain shackled. Jung warned that individuation asks you to die before you die, letting every counterfeit version of yourself burn so something authentic can finally breathe. Yet individuation is lonesome, excruciatingly so. While walking that road, you start to notice what can never be unseen. The games, the masks, the self-soothing lies people clutch to feel safe. Voice these observations, and you'll be mocked as aloof or arrogant. But in truth, you are a mirror, and most recoil from mirrors that reflect unflattering truths. Jung spent decades with patients paralyzed by their own shadows, those banished parts of the psyche they refuse to admit. Women, he noted, often grow up in cultures praising them for sidestepping that confrontation, lauding them as naturally pure and intuitive. Jung wasn't convinced. He insisted that the gravest threat to women was the unexamined animus, speaking with illusory certainty, moral superiority, and counterfeit authority. If a woman never integrates that inner masculine, she projects it onto every man she meets, faulting him for the very war she hedges from fighting within. Meanwhile, you fancy yourself her savior, believing that you alone will be the exception. If only you love enough, perform enough, prove enough, she'll select the real you. Projection doesn't work that way. It is a thief, replacing reality with illusion, until both partners awaken or perish within the masquerade. Thus, the heroine who once adored you as her champion may someday brand you her adversary, not because your essence changed, but because you failed to uphold a fable she never revealed. Jung deemed such psychological betrayal unavoidable when neither party owns their inner life. You did not deceive her, you simply disappointed the invisible knight she hired you to portray. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid confronting their souls, Jung wrote, and nowhere is that truer than in romance. Lovers stride into relationships, lugging unresolved childhood wounds, unmet cravings, unlived fears, then cling to each other and call it love. Jung called it possession. As long as you avoid the question, what if I generate this pattern, the tragedy repeats. You want to indict women as manipulative or shallow. Jung would peer straight through and ask, why did you allow yourself to be chosen by such a woman? A man who refuses to explore his own inner feminine is enslaved by hers. You're not a casualty, you are a volunteer. You opted for the fool's role because facing your emptiness seemed more terrifying than starring in her illusion. This is where many tune out, because this is where comfort dies and responsibility blooms. Jung supplied no tidy formulas, no three-step method to instant alpha status. He handed you a lifelong ordeal of self-confrontation, of sitting in silence until the illusions fracture and the voice whispering, "You're worthless without her," begins to fade. That voice will fight desperately. It will insist you need her, that manhood requires feminine validation. Jung's legacy counters with a more perilous message. The man able to stand without her, without praise, without being needed, is finally free. From projection, from performance, from living as someone else's notion of a man. arrive at that freedom and you don't harden into coldness. You radiate authenticity, rooted, grounded, vividly present. Paradoxically, women gravitate toward you then, not because you crave them, but because you don't. You'll smile, not out of callousness, but out of comprehension. She too must confront her animus. You cannot undertake that work for her. You can only mirror truth by walking your path unflinchingly. Society rarely embraces the individuated man. He unsettles people who rely on predictable categories to soothe their anxieties. Those who once begged for your attention may resent your self-sufficiency. Women still dominated by fantasy may label you emotionally detached. What they truly mean is that manipulation no longer sticks. You've stepped off their stage. Jung once quipped that the gods of old have become modern neuroses. Pursuing validation, then, is a spiritual malady. When you utter cliches like, "she's my everything," you're not romantic, you're outsourcing your soul. It's easier to load your meaning onto a woman's shoulders than carry it yourself, but she cannot bear that weight forever. When she finally drops it, as she must, you accuse her of betrayal. Really, she grants you a gift, the chance to grasp that forging manhood was always your task. In that raw revelation, you have two routes: curse her and join the chorus of embittered men, or do what Jung demanded, turn inward and start the lonely, liberating labor of becoming whole. The woman you chase out there mirrors the abandoned part within. Until you unite with that part, every romance stays a performance, every affection a transaction, every love a lie. Integrate your own inner feminine, and you cease chasing women. You do not plot, nudge, or posture. You simply stand, steady in your authentic form, and from that place you magnetize women who thirst for truth, not theater. You'll know her instantly. She won't swell your ego with extravagant promises or need you to complete her. She has met her own shadow, faced her animus, incinerated her illusions. She is whole in herself, and ready to meet you as a fellow traveler, not a sculptor seeking pliable clay. In that meeting, there is no desperation, clinging, or pretense, only truth, dangerous in its rarity, because it demands nothing, yet offers everything. It is born not of lack, but of freedom, the freedom to choose, to part, to stand side by side without masks. Most will never taste this union, because most will quit the journey too soon, choosing the comfort of performance over the anguish of authenticity. But if you persist, keep walking, keep standing alone, keep shedding every artificial layer, you will reach a precipice of stunning beauty. You will discover yourself. Women will cease to be your mirror or your mother. They will become partners, equals, allies. You will love by choice, from strength, from a knowing unashamed of itself. Jung left no map, only a warning. Refuse self-examination and you'll kneel to projections, especially feminine ones. Yet he also issued a challenge. Walk the road of individuation. Stop blaming women for roles you volunteered to fill, and abandon the hope of wholeness in someone else's gaze. The man who elects himself fully, unapologetically, is impervious to fantasy, immune to manipulation, irreducible to any character but his own. If these words stirred something deep, don't let them drift away like any other piece of content consumed and forgotten. Sit with them, let them needle and prod, then begin the work. Because no one can do it for you, and no woman was ever meant to. Jung didn't sugarcoat this. He described it as a spiritual possession, a state where the woman herself becomes unaware that she's no longer acting from her own consciousness, but from the shadowy grip of her inner masculine fantasy. And men, you fall for it because nobody taught you to spot it. You confuse being desired with being known. You mistake being chosen with being understood. You believe her words when she says you're different, when in reality you're just the latest face she's cast to fulfill a role she's been rehearsing since she was a child. And when the fantasy collapses, when the mask slips, you're left confused, betrayed, and humiliated, wondering what you did wrong. But you didn't do anything wrong, you just stopped being a convincing actor in someone else's play. Jung warned that the only way out of this psychological theatre is through what he called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole within yourself. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most men never start that journey. You've been trained to chase approval, to seek validation, to let women define your worth. And as long as you do, you'll keep playing the same role over and over again, getting replaced every time the audience gets bored. Individuation isn't glamorous, it's brutal. It requires you to confront the parts of yourself you've buried, the weak, the insecure, the broken. It demands that you stop blaming women for not seeing you and start seeing yourself. Because here's what Jung knew that most men will never understand. You don't become a man by being chosen. You become a man by choosing yourself. You don't earn your worth through her affection. You earn it by standing alone, fully awake, fully responsible, fully alive. A man who has faced his own unconscious cannot be seduced by projection. He is no longer a puppet in someone else's fantasy. He is the author of his own reality. Jung observed that the greatest tragedy of modern men is not that they are rejected, but that they are willing to mold themselves into whatever shape they believe will be accepted. You call it compromise, you call it partnership, you call it love. But Jung had a different name for it, self-betrayal. He warned that men who ignore their own psychic development become slaves to the feminine projection, bending themselves like wet clay into the shapes demanded by women who don't even know their own true desires. You stop being men and you start being masks, smiling, nodding, agreeing, performing until you forget who you were before you put the mask on. And women, they sense this. Oh, they sense it more than you could possibly imagine. The very thing you think will make her love you. Obedience, predictability, availability becomes the very reason she loses attraction. Why? Because the feminine instinct, Jung taught, isn't drawn to comfort, is drawn to mystery, to risk, to the man she cannot fully define or control. The moment you make yourself fully known, without boundaries, without a backbone, you don't become more lovable. You become invisible, disposable, replaceable. And yet, here's the paradox that keeps most men enslaved. You fear being alone more than you fear being fake. You'd rather lose yourself than lose her. You'd rather live in a role than face the terror of standing without applause. But Jung taught that until a man embraces that solitude, he will never be free. He wrote that individuation is a path not for the faint-hearted, because it requires you to die before you die, to let the false versions of yourself burn so that something real can finally emerge. But let me tell you something that nobody wants to say out loud. Individuation is lonely, terrifyingly lonely. Because as you walk that path, you begin to see things you cannot unsee. You begin to recognize the games people play, the masks they wear, the lies they tell themselves just to feel safe. And when you try to share what you see, they mock you. They call you cold, arrogant, too serious. They accuse you of being the problem. But you're not the problem, you're the mirror, and people hate the mirror when it shows them something they don't want to face. Jung knew this well. He spent decades studying patients who were terrified to confront their own shadow, the dark, rejected parts of their psyche they refused to acknowledge. And women, Jung warned, are often raised in cultures that reward them for avoiding that confrontation. They are told they are pure, emotional, intuitive, and complete, just as they are. But Jung didn't buy it. He wrote that the greatest danger to women was their unconscious animus, the voice inside them that speaks with false certainty, false authority, and false moral superiority. He warned that if a woman does not face and integrate this inner masculine force, she becomes a prisoner of it, projecting it onto every man she meets, blaming them for the very war she refuses to fight within herself. And here you are thinking you're her savior, thinking you'll be the exception, thinking that if you just love her hard enough, prove yourself loud enough, perform well enough, she'll finally choose you for you. But that's not how projection works. Jung taught that projection is a thief. It steals reality and replaces it with illusion, and until both men and women wake up from that illusion, they are destined to repeat the same tragedy over and over again, each one blaming the other, never realizing they're both dancing with shadows. And here lies the most ironic twist of all. The woman who once saw you as her hero will one day see you as her enemy, not because you changed, but because you failed to fulfill the fantasy she cast on you, and she won't even realize she's doing it. Jung called this psychological betrayal inevitable when neither party takes responsibility for their own inner world. You didn't lie to her. You didn't betray her. You simply disappointed the invisible character she invented in her unconscious mind. You were never him to begin with, and that's why she resents you. Not for your flaws, but for failing to live up to the myth she never told you you were hired to play. Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And nowhere is this more true than in romantic relationships. Both men and women enter them not as whole individuals, but as walking projections, dragging their unlived fears, unmet needs, and unresolved childhood wounds into the arms of another person they barely understand. You call it love. Jung called it possession. And like a man, hypnotized, you keep walking into the trap, thinking this time it will be different. But it never is, because you have not yet asked the most terrifying question a man can ask himself. What if I am the one responsible for this pattern? You want to blame women. You want to call them manipulative, deceptive, shallow. But Jung would look you in the eye and ask, and why did you let yourself be chosen by that woman in the first place? You see, the man who refuses to confront his own feminine inner world is destined to be a slave to hers. You are not a victim. You are a volunteer. You chose to play the fool. You chose to be the actor in her private myth, because facing your own emptiness, your own lack of wholeness was far more terrifying than playing a part in someone else's fantasy. And here's where most of you will stop listening, because this is where the comfort ends and the responsibility begins. Jung didn't offer cheap solutions. He didn't give you 3 steps to alpha male greatness. He gave you the brutal, lifelong task of self-confrontation, of sitting alone in the silence of your own mind until the illusions start to crack, until the voice in your head that says you're nothing without her begins to die. And make no mistake, that voice will fight for its life. It will tell you that you need her, that you are incomplete without her, that no man can live without feminine validation. But Jung's work whispers something more dangerous. It whispers that the man who can stand without her, without approval, without applause, without being needed, is the man who is finally free. Free from projection, free from performance, free from the tyranny of living as someone else's idea of a man. And when you reach that place, you don't become cold or distant. You become real. You become rooted, grounded, fully alive in your own skin. And that is when, paradoxically, women will feel the most drawn to you. Not because you need them, but because you don't. And you'll smile not because you're heartless, but because you finally understand. You understand that she is on her own journey too, that she must face her own animus, that she must wake from her own illusions. And you can't do that work for her. You can't save her from herself. You can only do what Jung did. You can walk your own path so fearlessly that you become a living mirror reflecting the truth back to everyone who dares to look. Most will turn away, but a few, a rare few, will thank you for it. And that, my friend, is the difference between being loved for the role you play and being respected for the man you've become. And when that moment comes, when you finally realize you don't need to perform anymore, you'll start to notice something strange. You'll notice how uncomfortable people become around you. They'll sense it even if they can't name it. The weight of your presence will unsettle them because you no longer fit into the predictable categories they use to feel safe. Jung warned that the individuated man is not welcomed by society. He is feared, misunderstood, labeled as distant or arrogant. But the truth is far more threatening. You have simply become untouchable, unbuyable, unmanipulable because you see through the game. And here's where it gets funny. The very people who once begged for your attention, your validation, your approval, they'll begin to resent you for not needing theirs. Women, especially those still possessed by the fantasy of the perfect man, will accuse you of being emotionally unavailable. They'll say you're too much in your head, too analytical, too distant. But what they really mean is that they can no longer control you. You've stepped off the stage. You've stopped reading from their script. And without that script, they don't know what to do with you because you've stopped being a character and started being a man. Jung once joked that the gods have become diseases, that what ancient cultures used to call divine possession, modern psychology calls neurosis. And make no mistake, men chasing validation are the most spiritually sick of all. You think you're being romantic when you say things like, "I'd do anything for her," or "she's my everything." But Jung would shake his head and tell you that what you call love is actually a refusal to carry your own soul. It's easier to project it onto a woman and make her the carrier of your hope, your meaning, your purpose. Because if she carries it, you don't have to. But here's the brutal twist. When she realizes she was never designed to carry your soul, she will drop it. She must drop it because no woman, no matter how loving, can hold the weight of a man who refuses to hold himself. And when she drops it, you'll feel betrayed. But you shouldn't. You should thank her, because in that moment when the illusion collapses, you finally stand face to face with the truth that the work of becoming a man was never hers to do. It was always yours. And in that raw moment of clarity, you have two choices. You can blame her, you can become bitter, you can join the angry chorus of men who point their fingers at women, mocking them, resenting them, swearing them off like cowards who never dared to face their own emptiness. Or you can do what Jung would have demanded of you. You can turn inward. You can start the lonely, terrifying, liberating work of individuating, of becoming whole without needing someone else to complete you. Because the truth is, the woman you're searching for out there, she's a reflection of the part of yourself you've abandoned. Until you face that part, every relationship will be a performance. Every connection a transaction, every love a lie. But when you do face it, when you integrate your own inner feminine, you become a man who no longer needs to chase women. You don't run after them, you don't manipulate them, you don't perform for them, you stand still, fully rooted in who you are. And from that place, something miraculous happens. You no longer attract women who want a character. You attract women who want the truth. And you'll know it when it happens, because she won't demand that you perform. She won't try to change your script. She won't fall in love with the fantasy of you. She'll stand before you raw and real, not as a goddess looking for worship, but as a human being willing to walk her own path beside you. No masks, no projections, no games. And when you meet her, the real her, not the fantasy, you'll see the difference instantly. She won't flood you with grand declarations. She won't treat you like the missing piece of her puzzle. She won't seduce you with the language of completion because she isn't looking to be completed. She isn't looking to be saved. She's done the work. She's met her own shadow. She's confronted her own animus. She's burned through her own illusions. And that's why she won't need you to perform. She won't need you to carry her soul. She'll stand there, holding herself, looking you in the eye. Not as a man she wants to mold, but as a man she is finally ready to meet. And in that meeting there is no desperation, there is no clinging, there is no performance, there is only truth. And that truth, Jung taught, is the rarest and most dangerous kind of love, the kind that demands nothing but offers everything, because it is not born of need, it is born of freedom. Freedom to choose, freedom to walk away, freedom to stand together without illusions, without masks, without fear. But let me warn you, most of you will never experience this, because most of you will quit before you get there. You'll settle for the performance, you'll settle for the fantasy, you'll settle for the temporary thrill of being seen as someone you are not, because facing who you truly are still feels unbearable. But if you have the courage, the brutal, gut-wrenching courage to keep walking, to keep standing alone, to keep stripping away every false layer you've built to earn approval, you will eventually find yourself standing at the edge of something terrifyingly beautiful. You will find yourself, and when you do, women will no longer be the source of your identity. They will no longer be the mirror you use to feel like a man. They will become something else entirely. Partners, not prizes. Mirrors, not mothers. Allies, not saviors. And you will love them not because you need them, but because you choose to. From a place of strength, from a place of wholeness, from a place that knows without apology who you are. Carl Jung didn't leave you a map to follow. He left you a warning that every man who refuses to confront himself will become a slave to the projections of others, especially the projections of women. But he also left you a challenge to walk the path of individuation, to stop blaming women for the roles you volunteer to play, to stop seeking wholeness in someone else's eyes, to stop waiting to be chosen. Because the man who chooses himself fully, unapologetically, relentlessly, is the man who cannot be controlled by fantasy. He cannot be seduced by performance. He cannot be reduced to a character in someone else's script. He becomes the author of his own life. And if you've made it this far, if you felt this message hit somewhere deep inside you, don't just scroll away. Don't let this be another thing you consume and forget. The dance of archetypes beyond the persona. In Jung's lexicon, the concept of the persona stands as a critical cornerstone of understanding human behavior. The persona, that social mask we wear to navigate the external world, serves a necessary function in society. It allows us to function within social contracts, to play our assigned roles, to maintain order. But when a man identifies too strongly with his persona, he loses himself in the process. Jung would argue that modern men have become masters of persona crafting, particularly in relation to women. You see, the persona isn't just about presenting a socially acceptable face to the world. In romantic contexts, it becomes something far more insidious. It becomes the deliberate crafting of a character designed specifically to win feminine approval. Men learn early which qualities women claim to value: sensitivity, emotional availability, understanding, support. And they fashion personas that emphasize these qualities, often at the expense of their authentic selves. But Jung understood something that modern relationship advice completely misses: The gap between what women say they want and what actually awakens their deeper instinctual response is vast and often contradictory. The man who crafts a persona based on stated preferences finds himself in a double bind. The very qualities he emphasizes to win approval become the same qualities that eventually dampen desire. Why? Because the persona, no matter how well crafted, lacks the vital energy of authenticity. Authenticity carries a magnetic quality that no performance, no matter how skilled, can replicate. Women sense this at an instinctual level. They respond not to the words a man speaks or even the actions he performs, but to the congruence between his external presentation and his internal reality. When that congruence is missing, when the persona becomes too polished, too perfect, women sense the hollowness beneath, and hollowness cannot sustain attraction. Jung described the unconscious as compensatory to consciousness. What this means in practical terms is that the harder you try to appear as one thing on the surface, the more powerfully its opposite quality emerges from your unconscious in unexpected ways. The man who tries too hard to appear strong reveals his weakness in subtle ways he cannot control. The man who performs sensitivity often harbors unexpressed anger that leaks through in passive-aggressive behavior. The unconscious always finds expression, always balances the equation. This is why the men who try hardest to please women often end up pleasing them least. Their personas become so disconnected from their authentic selves that women experience them as untrustworthy at a gut level, not because they're lying intentionally, but because they're living a fundamental incongruence. The gap between who they present themselves to be and who they actually are creates an uncanny valley effect that triggers instinctual suspicion. Jung recognized that this pattern creates immense suffering for both men and women. Men suffer the existential pain of living as performers rather than authentic beings. They experience the crushing weight of knowing, deep down, that they are loved not for who they are, but for the character they've created. Women suffer the disappointment of investing in men who inevitably reveal themselves to be different from the image they initially presented. Both parties feel betrayed, but neither understands the archetypal dance they're caught in. The way out of this dance isn't through better performance, it's through the abandonment of performance altogether. Jung used the term individuation to describe this process. Individuation isn't about becoming more individualistic in the Western sense of that word. It's about becoming undivided within yourself. It's about integrating the disparate aspects of your psyche into a coherent whole that no longer needs to hide parts of itself to be accepted. For men specifically, individuation involves confronting and integrating what Jung called the anima, the inner feminine aspect of the male psyche. Just as women project their animus onto men, men project their anima onto women.